2019. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded for posterity on YouTube, so please be aware that you will be recorded, and members, please speak as if you're speaking to the furthest person away in the room. And Bill, Councillor Bill, please turn off your mobile phone. Thank you. There are no apologies. We're moving straight into the public forum, and our first speaker this morning is Sally Benning from the Greerton Village Community Association. Welcome, Sally. The floor is yours.
Are we on? Yep. Okay. First of all, thank you for allocating us this 10-minute slot to speak. It has been quite tricky to put together something in the short notice that we had. We weren't aware that this item was coming up until Friday. And as I don't work in the office on Monday, it's been a bit of a mission to get to the people that we needed to. However, we do have some of our business owners here supporting us. I will assume, to save everybody's time, that councillors have read the information that I emailed through on Friday. So there was a letter from our organisation, from GVCA. I think there were 8 or 9 letters from individual business owners and 4 pages of signatures from further business owners, largely in Greerton, which our board just trucked round the streets on Wednesday after our board meeting. So I'll take all those as read. It would appear from the agenda that the main reason for this review, that this review is happening now, just less than 8 months after the bylaw came into effect, is due to the judicial review proceedings that are set down for March next year, rather than a bylaw, rather than a review about how the bylaw is actually working or not. That's our perception. You may correct us on that. So in August last year, we attended a meeting here, one of many over the last several years, where council voted to retain the bylaw as it was, with the wording which I'm really talking more to the begging bylaw rather than the homelessness, and I realise that the two go hand in hand, but for us in Greerton, the begging was by far the greatest issue rather than the homeless. So I'm really referring to the wording on the begging. And the council at that time voted to retain the bylaw as it was, with the wording as it was. It was a close vote, and we in Greerton Village, the business owners, the residents, and everybody that we were involved with, were very pleased that that had happened. In that 7.5 months since the 1st of April, as was written in our letter, we've seen an absolute 360 turnaround in what happens in Greerton with regards to our business owners, our shoppers, the safety of our shoppers, the safety of our staff, and the general feeling and vibe in Greerton Village. People have come back, slowly to start with, it's fair to say, but people have certainly come back now in numbers to shop in Greerton because they simply feel much safer. When we started this process, I guess, in October 2017, that's over 2 years ago, the issue had already been going on for a good 6 months. That was the time that the retailers really were needing somebody to do something, which is when we called a meeting, as was detailed in that letter. So that was the start for us. This is a little bit disjointed, as I say, because I didn't have an agenda until 5 minutes ago. So, I didn't have the notes off of the website. So it's just a little bit, sorry, but it's just a little bit here, there. One of the recommendations is there is talk, in the notes that I've read, is there is talk of ongoing work of council staff in this area. But that only comes after the statement that one full-time employee who was involved by council, specifically, who spent a lot of time out in Greerton, who who moved on was not being replaced due to financial constraints. There are several things in those notes that we've read. Not all beggars are rough sleepers, and indeed when some of us have spoken to beggars in Greerton who are now homed and asked them why, the frequent answer has been that they still need to beg for their extras and for their stuff. Tommy Wilson, who I think is still overseas, I contacted Tommy, but he was overseas at the time, but who has obviously had frontline experience with the genuine needy and has told us and TCC that they are there to help anyone in genuine need, and some have not taken up that offer. So we very much need to make the distinction between people who are genuinely needy, homeless, hungry, whatever, and the people who are coming into Greerton initially in gangs. When I say gangs, I mean groups of people. I'm not suggesting they were gangs. Groups of people being brought in the morning, being deposited with their signs, all had the same sign, all had the same black bag. Their drivers arrived back usually about 10:15 to give them morning tea. They then arrived back at lunchtime, quite often to give them food and collect their morning's takings, and they came back later in the afternoon and collected them and took them away. They were scammers. The police were aware of them. They were people who were not all certainly genuine needy. Sorry, that's not good. One of the things that I've read in the recommendation is that possibly council are looking at revoking the bylaw in total. Is it the best way to go? Well, for us in Greerton, the bylaw has worked very, very well from our point of view. We can only speak for our business community, although retailers, customers, of course, talk to us all the time. But I haven't seen any offers as to what might replace it if it weren't there. Another comment regarding the interpretation of words. Those of us that experienced firsthand the situation in Greerton know only too well that people do not need to be acting in an offensive way to be intimidating. When we had groups of 10 and 12 people sitting outside in front of a shop, which we did, and the few of you in this room that were out there at that time will know that. That's probably not a lot of you, but some of you certainly did. That in itself was very intimidating behaviour for people to walk through that barrage of people. No, they probably weren't blocking the actual entrance, but many, many people, including myself, were reluctant to then go into that shop. So they don't have to be acting in an offensive or violent way, which then becomes a police issue, and God knows we had enough police issues over that amount of time. Their presence alone was enough to put people off of going in shops. And that, I think, is the interpretation of the words, really. We've held meetings, the Tauranga City Council staff, with elected members, with our local community police constable, with the local police, with Area Commander Paxton. All of those meetings have taken place over the last, probably I guess in the last 2 years, since October. The police are adamant that any issues regarding beggars that are not considered threatening or violent should be handled by TCC. Again, a vicious circle, as how can that happen? There isn't anybody to enforce that. On the agenda, I see that there are 6 attachments, none of which we are able to read, so we do not have the benefit of all the information, obviously, that Council have with regards to the proposed judicial review. Obviously, we are aware that there's a cost to taking on a legal challenge, and whilst we totally understand that and Council's reluctance to do so, we also believe that the cost of revoking this bylaw will be way higher for the residents and business owners of Greerton Village should we return to the Greerton of 2.5 years ago. If there is any compromise, then we would absolutely compromise on the wording around the homeless part of that bylaw if we were able to retain the wording on the begging as it is now. So another thing to just clarify there, I've read in the press recently that we're trying to ban people from the whole of the city. We're trying to get people out of the city. They're not welcome anywhere. The wording is very clear, 5 metres of a retail outlet. And that's an operational one, not empty buildings. So that doesn't mean that they cannot be in Greerton or the CBD or anywhere else. I'm speaking for Greerton. It simply means that they cannot be within 5 metres of a retail outlet. And to us, that's really quite important. I won't say any more. I think we've covered everything in our letter, and from what I've said, I'm happy to answer any questions. There are 3 or 4 of our business retailers down there, one of those who wrote a letter, or both of them wrote letters to you, one of them who was physically abused, that had to go through the courts from trying to protect her own business, one who owns a pharmacy and had just really terrible things happening, people being stopped outside the pharmacy and their drugs being either requested or just simply taken away from them. They had to start delivering their prescriptions to people because they were too scared to come into Greerton to collect their pharmacy prescription. So that some of those people are here. So, as I say, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sally, and I acknowledge presence in the chamber of Terry Malloy. Questions from colleagues? Any questions? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, through the chair to the chief executive. For what reason are the attachments confidential? Because it strikes me that when reading them, it's difficult to have an informed debate if some of the information we're privy to is not shared by or with the community.
Essentially because it's legal advice in relation to judicial proceedings that are currently underway.
And sorry, follow up if I may, to the chair. The legal advice is that information cannot be shared with the public, or is that a decision made and recommended by staff?
Well, it's normal practice not to disclose openly legal advice, but that's a decision that council consider if it wishes to.
Councillor, later on in the agenda after the public forum, members can raise whether they wish for confidential stuff to be brought out into the open. My advice would be not to, but that is the prerogative of the committee. Any further questions from colleagues? Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sally, the amended wording that was agreed to by the Tauranga Housing Advisory Trust, it did change the original wording, but it does hold the 5 metre rule there and includes the nuisance factor. Can I ask, given that it wasn't enforced, it was about a message that area, 5 metres in the entranceway of a business, was a prohibited area for begging, and you have said yourself that it has made a huge difference. Do you accept that amendment may not change the way in which the message goes out, that we are trying to establish some protection for businesses? The nuisance is a difficult word also, but it does imply what is actually happening. They were being a nuisance, whether they were in 1 or 3 or 5. Can you comment on that? So you've got lots of experience out there.
I would like to think that if today is the day that decision has been made, if the option is to either revoke the bylaw totally or to take up that amendment, then I think at this stage we would probably celebrate taking up the amendment in the hope, exactly as you have said, that maybe over the last 7.5 months a pattern has been formed in that these people are not in Greerton at all, virtually at all, and that maybe if the wording were amended, maybe we would be able to retain that situation, and certainly it would be favourable to revoking the bylaw totally.
More, if I may. You've been there for several seasons. The summer period is when we see a lot more people come to town. I think in the past saw a lot more beggars come to town because they go where they think they can make money. So if we revoked it today, are you worried, and other retailers in Greerton worried, that we may just see a return very quickly to the situation that existed
We
several
would be
years.
devastated if it were revoked today, and I think I can speak for everyone in Greaton, certainly the majority of people, and I think that was very apparent by, the fact that somebody went out and in an hour got 4 pages of signatures just from businesses. Imagine if the public had been asked for their opinion, the people who are shopping and are affected. We would be seriously devastated if it were totally revoked. There would be businesses, without doubt, who would look very carefully at remaining in Greaton. We lost a number of businesses during that period of time. Everybody knows that. In the last, since this year, a number of new businesses have come back into Greaton, and they didn't see the situation as it was, thankfully. So they're there as new businesses, new investors wanting to make a living, just do their job, make a living, look after themselves and their families. Now, I would hate to see that situation revoked and to see what we had in Greaton 2 years ago, 18 months ago. I would hate to see that, and I know that the businesses would be devastated.
Terry Malloy wishes to add something, but I've got a final question from Councillor Hughes after that.
I just thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to acknowledge our new Mayor, Tembi, and the new councillors. Well done. I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys operate in the next 3 years, and I'm certain you'll do well. Also want to acknowledge the ladies from Tutuinga Whānau, Tracy Carlton from Milo Night, and I think Afina House representatives and others are here. You know, we all want the same thing for our community. We all want a safe and secure community for everybody, and I think that's where we need to head. So when you're making your decisions, please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Hi, thank you. I just, what strikes me is that the ban came in, and it's an unenforceable ban, and it came in, and what was it about the ban then that suddenly changed everything for Greaton? And if we did revoke the ban, would we be able to continue those actions and put a plan in place to enable the Greaton community and other communities to feel safe without giving the message to our homeless that they are disempowered and not welcome when they're already at the sort of feeling like they're at the bottom of their place right in that space?
Again, I make the distinction between the genuine homeless and the beggars.
Yeah.
And we know factually from Tutuinga Whānau, from the police, we know factually that many people who were begging in Greaton were not genuinely homeless. They were not begging because they were homeless. There were offers made to them by Tutuinga Whānau to home them. Nobody was turned away for food. So we're not talking about the genuine homeless that you mentioned, who are already feeling down and disconnected. We're talking about people who are coming into an area and basically taking advantage of others, some of those others, incidentally, who are probably in a worse situation than they. Many of the people that I saw, and bearing in mind, I've been there 4 years, I walk down the streets 3-4 times a day. Many of the people who were giving to those beggars were elderly people. Quite often, not for me to question them whether they could afford it, but I would hazard a guess that in many cases it was money that they perhaps could ill afford, but they felt as though either they were helping, which actually we probably know they weren't, or more often than not, certainly at its height, they were intimidated because people didn't just sit there with their hand out. People physically came up to you, knocked on your car doors, grabbed you on the shoulder. Hey, give me your money. So that would be my comment to that when the bylaw came into place on the 1st of April, we did see a dramatic difference very, very quickly because, all right, we were always told that it wasn't going to be enforceable, but obviously the message got through that this was something that you were no longer able to do without some form of consequences.
Thank you, Sally and Terry, for addressing the committee. For clarity, the decision today and the recommendations as written would trigger a consultative process, which would take some time, and there would be hearings in January if we went down that track. But thank you for coming in today to speak. Our next speaker in the public forum is Brian Berry from downtown Tauranga.
Good morning, everyone. Sally has gone through the day-to-day issues that we're all aware of as far as the rough sleeping and begging is concerned, so I won't address those. I'm sort of addressing more the principle and where the current bylaw sits, and also whether we should be making changes. Firstly, through the chair, as Terry Malloy just said, I'd like to welcome the newly elected members, and also the returning members, elected members, and also congratulate Tenby Powell, the new mayor, also, and we look forward to working with you over the next 3 years. Anyway, firstly, just to clarify, I represent, I'm the chair of Main Street Tauranga, which represents about approximately 650 members who operate in within the city centre. And I think my views also, my view is that our membership is wholly in support of the approach I'm going to take, and I think it also reflects a reasonable majority of the views of Tauranga citizens and visitors to Tauranga. Secondly, rather than just referring constantly to the city centre, I just refer to Tauranga or the city. So on behalf of our members, I wish to argue against revoking the begging and rough sleeping provisions in the Street Use and Public Places Bylaw 2018 and or editing the current version. I feel that the issue has been overcomplicated. I've thought about it a lot, and being a simple person, I would like to dumb it down with a few key thoughts. In comparison to most other countries, all New Zealanders should be proud of our human rights history and the protection afforded by the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990. When it comes down to it, the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act comes down to showing respect for all members of our society, no matter what their status in the community, and that respect needs to be a two-way street. I have a few questions for you to consider. Does the current bylaw ban rough sleeping and begging in the city? No, it does not. Does the current bylaw respect the rights of people to operate a retail business and make an often challenging living by providing an unrestricted shop front that is fit for purpose for a retail environment? Yes, it does. Does the current bylaw provide the opportunity? Does the current bylaw provide the opportunity for the rough sleepers and beggars to show respect for the retailers and shoppers and visitors to our city by locating themselves no less than 5 metres from a retail shop entrance? Yes, it does, and they are showing that respect. How has the current bylaw been managed? There is currently no punitive aspect to how the current bylaw has been managed by the police or the council. Working with social agencies, the approach is one of respect, liaison and solution finding for those who find themselves in difficult circumstances. Why has the current bylaw worked well in Greerton? Because they have a low retail vacancy factor. Why is the current bylaw having its challenges in the city centre? That's because of the large number of currently vacant retail premises. As far as the amendment is concerned, just following on from Sally's presentation, I think the wording nuisance is subjective and intimidation is subjective, and therefore we do not support amendment to the bylaw. There is a saying that you will all be familiar with: if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. Leave something alone, avoid attempting to correct, fix or improve what is already sufficient. So that is our stance. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are you happy to take questions? Are there any questions from colleagues to Mr. Berry? Mayor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Brian, thanks so much for coming in today. Can I just ask, and apropos what Sally Benning was talking about, what has the effect been since the imposition of the bylaw on downtown Tauranga?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my submission, the bylaw did send a message to the beggars and rough sleepers, and they are respecting that message by actually complying with the 5 metre minimum distance requirement from retail premises. So there has been a noticeable improvement.
Thank you. No further questions. Microphone. Thank you. That concludes thank you, Brian, for addressing the committee. That concludes the public forum for today. Colleagues, are there any late items? There are no late items. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. Is there any confidential business that colleagues recommend transferring into the open? No. Change to the order of business. I would seek to move, and I will move, that we bring forward item 7.4 on the agenda, which is the homeless and, the begging and rough sleeping sections of the Street Use and Public Places bylaw, because we have residents who are in the audience here to listen to that right now. So I would move we bring that forward. That's seconded by Councillor Cloud. Any discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? The ayes have it. Okay, so any conflicts of interest? Declarations of conflict of interest? There are none. Let's move now to page 25 of our agendas, to the review of the begging and rough sleeping provisions of the Street Use and Public Places bylaw. And from staff to advise us, we have Jeremy Bowes and Rebecca Gallagher.
Good morning. You'll see that the report that is located at page 25 of your agenda sets out the review of the begging and rough sleeping provisions of the Street Use and Public Places bylaw. This review has been brought back at the request of the new council, and we have looked at the current situation based on the complaints that we've received over the last few years, the challenges with the enforcement approach, and have considered these things together with the statutory requirements when making a bylaw. So forgive me if I, for those who've been here before, and I go back to basics, but for those who are new, I thought I would give a very quick recap of when you make a bylaw, the things you must consider. So under the Local Government Act, under section 145, a bylaw can only be made for one or more of the following reasons. So to protect the public from nuisance, protecting, promoting and maintaining public health and safety, and minimising the potential for offensive behaviour in public places. So, bearing that in mind, you can then move to what we refer to quite often as section 155. And that requires that before you commence the process of making a bylaw, that you consider that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem. If a bylaw is considered the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem, then through consultation and assessment, council must decide whether or not that the wording that is proposed is the most appropriate form of bylaw, which means that it also it is as restrictive as it needs to be. It only goes as far as it needs to address the perceived problem, that there's no unintended consequences of that wording, that it is the most appropriate way that you could possibly have a bylaw. The other part of section 155 is that it cannot be inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act. What that means, though, is that under the Bill of Rights Act, you can have justified limitations on rights. So those limitations can only be reasonable, so you can only limit it as reasonably possible, and that can be demonstrated in a free and democratic society. This area has not been tested a lot in court in New Zealand. There are a few case law around these sorts of things, but the area in which we have moved into with the current wording of the bylaw is new territory for New Zealand in that respect. So, bearing that in mind, since the bylaw was first considered back in November 2017, we have gone through a number of iterations and things where the wording we got to was adopted this time last year and came into force in April. During that time, the likes of the People's Project and Awhina House have been set up in Tauranga, which have been able to get set up, start doing their work, and from the reports that we've been receiving, are making significant inroads with our chronic homeless. The concerns that we've got are outlined in the report, and you'll see at page 31 of your agenda that I've tried to simplify as much as possible the decisions that are required today. So that first decision is that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem. If council determines that it is not the most appropriate way, then council would need to go out and consult to remove clauses 20.2 and 20.3 regarding begging and rough sleeping. If the council determines that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem, then you need to consider what that bylaw covers, and we've provided a couple of examples of what those new amendments could look like, both of which would require public consultation. The other option, of course, is that we make no changes to the bylaw and we continue with our current approach. I have outlined in the report what we consider the what we consider the perceived problem to be at the moment, which is the nuisance and other negative impacts of begging and rough sleeping in public places. This is in contrary to the previous problem, which was defined regarding the impacts on businesses and the wider community of begging and rough sleeping in public places. The reason for that is to align us more closely with Section 145 of the Local Government Act, which sets out our reasons and ways that we can make a bylaw, which again is about protecting the public from nuisance, maintaining public health and safety, and minimising the potential for offensive behaviour in public places. What isn't there is primarily to direct something that protects business interests. So by making it broader and making sure that we are protecting the public from these things. I'll now accept questions.
Thank you. Any questions, colleagues from staff? Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I actually have a few, so I'm happy to take a break and let someone else, you get sick of my voice, I know. But the first one is, and Rebecca, you've had to work this through for a long time, so, sympathies on back here again with it. But just in paragraph 25, I wanted to clarify, it was raised earlier by one of the presenters. The staff that we had engaged out there in the community, I believe it was Paul. The paragraph there suggests that council resolved to remove funding so that he was no longer able to do his work. But I am not aware of any resolution. What occurred in my memory is that suggestions were made that to enforce the bylaw, we would have to spend probably 150,000, I think it was, or maybe 250,000. And council, in passing the bylaw, made it clear we did not want to spend that money to underpin the enforcement of the bylaw. But I don't believe we ever gave any instructions to say we would withdraw funding from a staff person who was actually doing a fantastic job out there in the community, working with the homeless, identifying issues. You know, that was a totally different matter. And I think, just for the impression, I would like to see that clarified if we could, from maybe it's the Chief Executive or Christine or someone who's best to answer, but I just think that could be addressed.
Yeah, look, I'm not aware of the specific details, but I don't believe, in fact, council have not, withdrawn funding. Council just did not allocate any particular funding to enforce this bylaw. And so it would have been another decision made to not replace a staff member if that staff member left the organisation.
That staff member left and we didn't replace them. Okay. So thank you for that clarification. Or yes, thanks, Barbara.
Just to add to what the Chief Executive said, the implementation or the enforcement of the bylaws is covered under our team who enforce the general bylaws.
Ready, go ahead.
Hughes.
I'm just wondering, talking of unintended consequences, has the work been done around for the homeless people? Have there been any unintended consequences for the homeless based on this ban? And yeah, in terms of their safety or their anything that has possibly come about from it?
Probably not the role of the policy team to that one. So I guess Gareth is probably better positioned to do that.
I'd need to check with staff and come back to you on that.
So I just so we've got a lot of information about the retailers. We don't have to seem to have any information from the actual people that are probably the most unlikely to be able to speak in this situation. I don't think that we're really briefed with enough information to make a very clear decision today if we haven't got that kind of information. Just wanted to note that.
Thank you. That's a valid point for debate. I've got Councillor Clout and then back to Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Rebecca and Jeremy. So hypothetically, with the revised wording that you're suggesting, the amended wording, a person could sit, for example, 1 metre away from a shop entrance quietly, not making a nuisance of himself as such or herself. So would that person be able to sit there 1 metre away from the door entrance of a retail premises?
Under the amended wording, they would be able to, provided that they weren't creating a nuisance, intimidation, harassment or alarm or distress, they would be able to do that.
Thank you. That's a very important point I think we need to remember. Also, I draw your attention, everyone, to page 107, and it defines what the word nuisance is. So my question is, and I had a look at section 29 of the Health Act 1956, and to me I can't see anything that really is relevant to this particular definition of the word nuisance. It talks about cesspits and dead animals and so forth. So the question is has the word nuisance been defined in any sort of court cases or under common law that you were aware of?
The term nuisance is obviously extremely subjective. It is defined depending on the circumstances multiple times. There is case law around that, but again, it is subjective and it will depend on the situation. We have had nuisance defined in this bylaw, and this has not been revised. This definition of nuisance has not been revised through consultation or anything like that. It was part of the original wording, and would be consistent with a general approach to nuisance. But again, as I said, it's subjective.
Councillor Bullock.
Yes, interesting though that the instructions from the Local Government Act require us to, or empower us to make bylaws that avoid a nuisance to the public. So, this is the area we're in, really. And I want to just drill on to that this section 155.1, where it says that a bylaw has to be the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem. It implies that it's kind of the only tool in the toolbox. But in fact, in reality, that is not the case, is it? Because with our freedom camping bylaw, for example, we have passed a bylaw, but we don't rely only on the bylaw. We have our enforcement officers going out, not only enforcing the bylaw, but offering assistance to people. And people sleeping in cars who are locals, who are, rough sleeping there, are not given infringements. So it needs to be understood that it doesn't have to be the only thing we do. It is appropriate as a tool, as one tool in the toolbox, which is what has always been said through the debate. Can you confirm that or not?
So the difference with Freedom Camping is that there is a Freedom Camping Act, and the Freedom Camping Act provides a different legislative requirement about having a bylaw or not, which is different to a bylaw made under the Local Government Act, which requires us to address that a bylaw is the most appropriate way, which is considering all of the options, and that a bylaw is the most appropriate way forward.
I'll take some time to think of another example and come back to you.
Councillor Salisbury.
I would like to know, what have we done to understand the situation and find more appropriate ways to support those that are vulnerable in our city, apart from the bylaw? Is that a question for Gareth, maybe?
Through the chair again, we'll have to get staff to come in and talk to that, so just texting people now. Yep.
Good morning, I'm Megan Holmes. I'm the manager of the Community Development Activity. So as far as work in the homelessness space, we have a community development advisor who has that as a key part of their portfolio. We have contracted Social Link to facilitate a regular meeting of all of the homelessness service providers. The work that has come out of that they've been meeting regularly, over the last several months, and the work that has come out of that as a result of discussions from that group is a jointly funded homelessness strategy, which we're about to start work on. So that will be, it's not a TCC-led strategy, it will be a community or a sector-led strategy, and we will have actions allocated to us in the implementation plan associated with that, as will other providers and other funders. So that should support, or would provide a level of support to homeless people, to the providers, and help to address some of the issues.
Councillor Bullock.
Supplementary, while Megan's there, didn't we give assistance to a Whena House being established? Didn't we work hard on the People's Project being brought to town? There are other things that we actually have done a lot of.
That's correct, Councillor Bordock. So we have been quite active in this space for a number of years. Firstly, through the establishment of our community project, which was a sector-led steering group that helped to bring the People's Project to Tauranga. We have, as you've correctly stated, Council has provided funding not only for the setup of a Whena House, but also towards the first year of operating costs, and some funding towards the People's Project. Free rent is also provided to the men's night shelter, along with various other types of support, mainly through Project Tauranga. And we also have a resource that is put together that provides a list of all of the support that's available to people who are struggling with housing needs right across the sub-region. And that's been done in collaboration with providers.
Any final questions, colleagues? Yes, I'm sorry. No, don't be sorry. Councillor Baldock.
This question may require us to go into public excluded, so I await advice from staff. But I'm interested to know, before we get to resolutions and debate, what the current position of the Tauranga Housing Advisory Trust is. Are we in a position where we continue where we were before, or do we need to go back and talk to them again? And if that involves legal stuff, we may have to then go into public excluded. I just leave that.
Through the chair, their position hasn't changed.
Councillor Baldock, has that satisfied that line of questioning?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Councillor Salisbury.
I guess I would just like to know, are we seeing a reduction in the homeless presence or the begging because of the work happening in this space that would make the bylaw no longer the most appropriate action?
That's a question for staff's view on the appropriateness of the bylaw.
You'll see that I've put in a graph around the number of complaints that we've received since April 2018, which is at page 28 of the agenda. There has always been a difference between begging complaints and rough sleeping complaints. And at this point in time, I can't necessarily say that there has been a reduction, simply because it has fluctuated at quite low levels from the beginning. There has been some touch points where there was a lot of public attention to this issue, and a number of the complaints we received were regarding issues that were not begging or rough sleeping. So things like public fighting, drugs, those sorts of things, which are issues for the police. They have always been quite low levelled.
Councillor Baldock, final question, or
No,
Mayor Powell, do you have a
just
quick subsequent question?
I was just indicating that if questions are finished,
yeah.
I would be happy to move something.
Mayor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. It strikes me that we have become a bit confused on a range of things here. And I think we're confusing begging and rough sleeping. And I think the two, while there may be a correlation, there's a fundamental difference between the two. And I absolutely think that we are confusing homelessness as a separate issue. Now, from my perspective, and Megan, I really appreciate what you're saying. I'd like to understand more, and not now, but sometime later, exactly what the coordination of that group is. And in fact, the question I have for you, and we can do it later, is why TCC is not leading that. Because I think compared to other cities I can think of and as global best practice, I think we have an ability here to get everybody together, including all the wonderful people who are represented here that are desperately caring for our most vulnerable, our homeless people, and doing it mostly in silos. And I worry that we maybe, and Jaco, you can probably talk to this in a more informed manner than I can, but getting together with the police, the DHB, and a range of agencies that give support to our homeless people in a way that will develop a plan and a sustainable strategy that will take us forward, and with a net result of being able to house our homeless. That's, I guess, what I'm looking for ultimately with the discussion that will come from this discussion on the bylaw. And the bylaw to me is extremely important that we also, in reference to that, look after the retailers of Greerton, the CBD or Main Street, Tauranga, Mount Maunganui, or anywhere else for that matter. But I think we're getting very confused on two issues which in my mind are somewhat separate, and I think we're blurring them together with a lot of interesting academic thought on it around bylaws and what have you. And I just wonder if we can sort of cut to the chase on this and leave at the end of this meeting, no matter what is the outcome of it, but at least having the ability to move forward with a group of people who are engaged and who have the knowledge of it to be able to develop a plan to look after our homeless.
Through the chair, at your request, we are meeting on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock to start that conversation.
Okay, colleagues, as I have, Councillor Baldock has notified me that he wishes to move something. However, I am prepared to move from the chair for discussion, A. That being said, it would be my preference to yield that to a new colleague, given that it is our first meeting only. So is there somebody out there who would be prepared to move A for discussion?
I'm prepared to move A for discussion.
Moved by Councillor Aubrey. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Mayor Powell. Okay, Councillor Aubrey, you wish to speak to your proposal.
So I wanted to open my discourse with some context, and I've asked Coral to bring up a couple of graphs on homelessness and statistics. Because what we have is we have a housing emergency which has resulted in a homelessness population that's burgeoning and growing. And the reason for that is we have unaffordable rent, right? So a couple of years ago there was this research report done for Smart Growth, and they found that 2/3 of renters had unaffordable levels of rent. And what that's meant is that a whole proportion of our society has moved economically backwards into debt, eventually into cars, garages, and motels if they can find them. So what's up there is just some statistics from the Ministry of Social Development. So you can see in the last year, the number of payments for emergency housing has skyrocketed. Also, the number of households who need food help has also skyrocketed. In the TCC boundary, the number of households who are on the MSD housing register, that's people who qualify for a social house but can't get into it, has also been steadily increasing. So when we have working people falling into homelessness, we have this other group of our residents, and they are our residents in the same way that someone in Papamoa or someone in Matua is a resident. They might have trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, other mental health issues. They may have just been released from prison without any paperwork to support them. They might have addiction issues and likely severed from friends and family. They're not going to be able to get into a house. They're not going to be supported. They're going to end up on the streets. And the consequence of having a lot of homeless people in our city is that there's going to be social issues, right? They have mental health issues often. They have addiction issues, and that's going to cause issues in society when they bump into people. So for me, a bylaw isn't the option or isn't the solution when we've got an accelerating problem. We're going to have more and more homeless people on our streets. And unless we build houses and unless we support people into houses, this issue is going to get worse rather than better. So we need to be supporting our people rather than trying to remove them from our city. So a few weeks ago, I saw a father and his daughter. They'd just been evicted from where they were staying, and they didn't know where else to go, and they were begging in the street, right? So they didn't know what social help was available to them. MSD was closed, and because they were in the city centre, I was able to buy them some bus cards, give them a pamphlet on all the social services available, and when I saw them a week later at Under the Stars, he'd got another job and he was in a hotel with MSD. Now, if they were relegated to, or felt that they weren't able to come to the city and ask for help, maybe that couldn't have happened. So my preference is, rather than sending a message that our most vulnerable aren't welcome in our city We should be sending a message that we're going to try to help you. And donating all that money to lawyers is a bad solution, right? We should be donating that money to people working in the space to help our people. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Powell is seconder. Do you wish to speak now? Okay. Any other speakers to A? Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I think Councillor Arbery's made a very good presentation of the issue of homelessness. And I think, as has been said already by Mayor Powell, we are confusing the issues. Homelessness is a really big problem for our city, and we need a lot of tools in our toolbox to address it. Lack of housing is one of them. But the motion in front of us is to revoke a bylaw which was very narrowly defined to address a separate issue. An issue of people who come to the city or who live in the city to beg in a manner which has caused significant impact to our retail businesses in both Greerton and the Main Street and Mount Maunganui, and it may spread to other places. These are not people, as has been said often, and by the agencies that are on the front lines. These are not people who are in desperate need. They have needs, they may have addictions, they may have all sorts of problems, but being on the street and asking for money is not helping them at all. They are using that money, and we had Tommy Wilson here from Te Tuanga Whānau explain that he has seen it with his own eyes, that they are taking money from people on the street and going and using it to fund their habits, or they are being dropped off in 2s and 3s in vehicles that are very expensive because they are being used and abused by others in the city. And I have seen that internationally, where people use crippled children to extract money from people who have soft hearts, who want to do something. So we are dealing with different issues, and I do not support the revocation of the bylaw that we have spent so much time going through. I support, as I've said, amending it to deal with the legal challenge to it, but I think it would be a mistake. I think we would find ourselves back in square one very quickly. I noticed, I was skimming through the newspaper on another matter the other day, but Bay Times, front page, you have to look at it for the date, but I think it was July or somewhere. We've got our village back. Please, let's not forget the trauma. And it wasn't just businesses who were being affected. The public were being affected. We passed a bylaw because we are empowered to address nuisance that affects the public. And the shoppers were being affected. They were abandoning going to those retail centres because they had to wade their way through beggars. So I urge councillors not to revoke that bylaw. The rough sleeping one is not necessarily always homeless who are needing a place or wanting a place to live, because they have been approached at times and have not wanted to receive help either. They have not gone to the men's shelter or the Awhina house. You know, it is a serious problem. It is hard to deal with. But to not provide some protection for our businesses, that within 5 metres of their front entranceway, it is not acceptable for someone to bring a mattress and lie down and sleep there, on occasion urinate and defecate there and leave a mess for people in the morning to have to clean up, is not an unreasonable thing to do. Yes, there is a problem with perception. Yes, there is a problem with what message that sends. But it also sends a message positively that we protect our businesses and that we will do what we can to remove that problem. We can still have armies of people going out to help people, and we ought to. We are not without compassion. As has been said already by Megan, we have done a lot already to set up things, and hopefully we will do more. I support fully Mayor Temby's idea, and if I move a motion, if this fails, I will add an amendment to it whereby we set up a working group to make sure that we do work in that space of collaboration to do more for the situation that exists.
Thank you, councillors. I'll speak to the motion now. Ever since the idea of a bylaw was first proposed, I found it morally abhorrent that we would have a bylaw regarding this issue in our city. But as has been said this morning, the issues of homelessness and rough sleeping and begging are separate. You would have heard me, if you go back through the recording, correcting myself early when I was introducing this paper. I accidentally called it the homeless bylaw, but it is the begging and rough sleeping sections of the street use in public places bylaw. So over the last couple of years, I have argued passionately to the point where I had to even apologise to Terry Malloy at one stage. I've argued passionately against having a bylaw on this issue. That being said, the compromise, the solution which sounds acceptable to the trust of adding a nuisance and an intimidatory factor to the wording of the bylaw, in my view, reluctantly does make that option acceptable to me because it targets the behaviour and not the person. The bylaw is currently worded, in my view, targets the person. The compromise, which is being potentially proposed if this fails, targets the behaviour rather than the person. And so, reluctantly, I will be voting against A today. What has given me some level of comfort, and I must admit that I did have a rather sleepless night last night, what has given me some comfort is the character of Councillor Baldock and Terry Malloy when they proposed this course of action. It's not for, in my view, it wasn't for malevolent reasons. It was coming from a place where they were seeking to help our community and our retailers. And so for me to stand strong at this time and say we need to chuck it out, which has been my position all along, I think would be letting down our retailers to some extent as well, because they, who are trying to make a living, are suffering as well. And so I would urge colleagues of either persuasion, those that wish to throw the bylaw out, I would urge them to consider compromising that view as I am today for a solution which targets the behaviour rather than the person. But C, I'm not going to say B, but C, those who would seek to draw council into a protracted legal battle with the trust by keeping the bylaw as worded, I would urge those colleagues to also compromise, because in my view, and I think without speaking outside of school, council is going to lose if we go through that course of action through the courts, and that will cost ratepayers money on an exercise which may be bloody minded, and that money, as Councillor Aubrey has mentioned in his movement of A, could be better used elsewhere. So I'd urge colleagues at both sides of the spectrum, those who were formerly on my side of the argument in terms of throw the thing out, and those that would be on the side of let's go to court and do the battle. I would urge both colleagues of both those views to come together in a middle ground, which is B. And so for that reason, I am voting against A as is currently on the table. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I appreciate the exhortation from the chair for people to compromise, and I also appreciate the movement by Councillor Larry Baldock from his original impassioned position, and in some ways the movement by the chair from his original impassioned position. You were implacable foes not so long ago, and you seem to have arrived at not a bad place. But I would still struggle to support anything other than A, purely and simply because we are accepting a situation not of our making, and we are playing with addressing symptoms of a decision, a number of decisions in central government to create a society where the resourcing and services required to provide a good quality of life for all our citizens are not being made available. And I'm inclined to support A unless we could find it in ourselves to add some clause to the compromise position which would result in Tauranga City Council collectively making it clear to central government that their abject failure in their responsibility to provide for all the citizens of this country is not acceptable. And I would note with no irony that we will be discussing a significant and undoubtedly costly submission to central government on the RMA, for God's sake, when we seem to have no willingness to challenge central government on issues that are far more substantive for those people in this society who are dispossessed, disenfranchised, and devoiced by the actions of central government. So at the moment, unless those who want compromise are prepared to indicate prior to this vote that they are prepared to accept an amendment and would support an amendment which would entail TCC communicating with central government our frustration at their inability to fulfil their social obligations, I will support the motion as moved. I seek an indication.
Councillor Clout. Thank you. I think we all know the history of this. We know that central government has dropped the ball big time, so this is not new to us, and I don't know how writing a letter to central government is going to make any difference at all. Of course, I would support that, but that's only really just a yeah, to me, it's not a substantive way forward. We know about homelessness being on the rise, increase in requirements for MSD funding, etc. So none of this is new to us. The question is, do we need a bylaw? Clearly the answer is yes. We know that the retailers have been massively affected over the last few years particularly by the begging situation and also some of the rough sleeping right adjacent to their premises. We've had indications that the current bylaw has worked, and for us to back down now on that is just a real bad move backwards in my view. So we'll not be supporting A. When it comes to B, I'll look at that at the time. Thank you.
Further speakers. Councillor Granger.
Hey, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank all the people coming in today. It's great to see you here, whether you're in support or not. Secondly, Sally and Brian, thank you for coming along as well and speaking up. You're the people at the coalface, and I think that's very, very important that we get that message from you people. Terry, I just want to congratulate Terry, sitting over there. Might I say that, and I admire Terry very much. It's been a long haul since 2017. For Terry to do what he has, especially creating a bylaw, and that certainly isn't easy, but I think he's done a fantastic job. He's there to help the people in many respects, just not the shop owners and the people getting housed. It's the other people he is as well. Maybe you don't think it, but it has. I think that's very, very important. The Tauranga Housing Advocacy Trust, they're concerned that this bylaw was a breach of the New Zealand Bill of Rights. What about the rights of the shopkeepers, the shop owners, and the people that have been subject to being intimidated, harassed? What about them? And that is a concern to me. We've got in the report here that the bylaw is not the most appropriate way of addressing the problem. Maybe it isn't in some people's eyes. But one thing this bylaw has done, we've gone outside the square, and I'm basically saying it's worked. Something like this has worked. We've had messages from other councils. Congratulations. We've had the gumption to go out and do something. We've had many people saying, don't revoke the bylaw. It has worked. And that's something we've got to take on board. Yako, thank you. Good to listen to you come on board as regards to the homelessness. Absolutely, and I thank you for that and your points mentioned. And yes, I agree with the Mayor, maybe it's a separate division. We could talk and discuss that down the track. But finally, I'm not supporting by revoking this bylaw. I feel that there is the possibility, and it will come on board, that we can water it down a tad. I'm probably more in agreement with that. Although in the past, you know, I'm a fighter, take the lock, stock and barrel to court, but I don't want to go down that track. And it's been mentioned why. So thanks for listening, and that's about all I've got to say.
Councillor Hollis.
Thanks, Chair. When I started reading this and getting involved, it occurs to me that the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act needs to be really thought about, and thanks, Bill, for the mention of that. We're removing people's rights to a lot of freedoms with this bylaw. I also think that the confusion, as Mayor Tenby pointed out, is about begging and homelessness and rough sleeping compared with the nuisance factor of those rough sleepers that are a bit messy, and the intimidation by some of the, not really begging, it's more extortion that has been happening around the city. Unless those people are removing other people's rights to go about their business, then there's no, we're not solving anything at all with this bylaw. If I was rough sleeping and I chucked a sign out next to me asking for a bit of spare change, that's still begging, but it's not the same as tapping someone on the shoulder at the ATM. And so I think the unintended consequence of the bylaw as we've got it is that it's standing on people's rights, rights for freedom and rights of peaceful assembly. I don't think that this bylaw in its current state does anything of any consequence at all. That the people that are breaching other people's rights through intimidation and perhaps even violent acts can be sorted out by the police, because that's the appropriate way to do it. And perhaps that's where the issue is. Maybe when somebody makes a complaint, that complaint isn't taken seriously. That the rights of people that are being trampled on aren't being looked after as a retailer, for example, adequately enough. And perhaps we need to involve that particular arm of our city a little harder. At the moment, I am going to support the motion as it is. I think that the bylaw isn't appropriate. If we have to have a bylaw change, it just needs to be attacking that part of society which is a nuisance, leaving the others alone. This one will still have the unintended consequence of being all-encompassing for rough sleepers and for people that need our help.
Thank you. Final call, colleagues. Councillor Salisbury.
So I'm really conflicted by this bylaw. So in my view, a bylaw is an attempt to manage behaviour. It's not really a solution to address the complexity of issues that we have here. I mean, I value the vulnerable in our city, and I value the businesses, and I value the general public equally. And I don't think this bylaw values all people equally. It seems indiscriminate between those who are genuinely in need and those who are taking advantage of or pressuring people. And so, I mean, I think if we move down the path of maintaining a bylaw, I would like to see us as TCC engage in a much more robust work in this space, that we can actually in some way lead some solutions, because I don't see this bylaw being a solution that actually values all people equally.
Yes, thank you to everybody. I acknowledge you all in the audience. It's great to see the community involved in these conversations. I would have loved to seen some people talking for the homeless, but as we know, the homeless are the kind of people that can't speak very well for themselves. I feel like we've come into this discussion really unprepared in terms of what has been the effect of the bylaw. What were the unintended consequences? It's been in for 8 months, and none of this was in the reporting to say, well, have the homeless in other ways been affected by this or not? We can't see that here. But I did go down to the Kai night the other night, and one of the main concerns there was for women and young girls who have very recently may come. It's the same thing that Jaco said, that when you first arrive on the street, that's the place where we want to be able to pick people up and get them into the right place. But if they're not visible and we're not able to see where they are, they may be hidden, and then we're not able to find them, and it's a dangerous place out there. So I guess I'd like to know whether that's what has happened or if that's a problem from this bylaw. It's certainly a perceived problem from the people that I talked to on the street at the dinner night. I also agree that this bylaw, even though, and I really acknowledge that the retailers, I think that we would immediately need to look at, well, what was it about the bylaw that worked? I mean, obviously it was a message, but we can send messages in different ways. We can also engage, and we can make sure that we're supporting our retailers. But I also agree that a bylaw is not the right solution. I can see Wellington City Council decided against the bylaw, and they have this amazing strategy directly on their website that tells people exactly what they're going to be doing. It also gives a lot of information of how you can be empowered when you have a problem, when there's people that are infringing your rights, because the fact is that with this bylaw, the problems that we're seeing that involve people being harassed or sleeping outside of people's shop fronts are actually against the law. In other cases, it's a doubling up. This bylaw is a doubling up. So we need to find how can we work together with security, with police, with community to enable that situation not to exist, not through a bylaw which sends a message to the rest of the community to say that we are sweeping them aside. I will be voting against the bylaw.
Okay, colleagues. Right of reply. Do you wish to exercise your right of reply, Councillor Arbery?
I don't think the two issues are separate. Often people who are homeless beg, right? I knew one gentleman who was part of the infamous Greta Begging Bang gang, and he's now in a house and married of all things and working as a security guard. So at least one person who was part of that problem won't be a problem any longer. I don't know about the others. I don't know them. The other thing I wanted to say is, when we look at organisations set up to deal with complex behavioural issues, the New Zealand Police, Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Health are set up well to deal with a range of complex behavioural problems. Tauranga City Council does not have counsellors with an S. It doesn't have a support network to support the frontline staff who have to interact with occasionally violent people. So I think it's an unfair risk to put our staff into, and we should be leaving it to the police to deal with complex behaviour. Things like urination, defecating, that's a crime, right? So that's not something that should be enforceable by a bylaw. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, colleagues.
Mr. Chairman, just one matter, if I may. One councillor in his address was seeking a response from a future motion. I just wondered if you would consider giving him that satisfaction of a response. I can't do it because I don't have a right of reply.
Sorry, could you remind me of who the councillor was, and that was
Councillor Robson was saying that his vote was going to be dependent upon whether we wrote a letter to central government.
And so you would be foreshadowing your opinion of that matter in response to that question posed, is that right? Yes, Councillor Baldock, absolutely.
I mean, we have written many letters to central government about many issues, and clearly we have to be partners with them, so I'd be open to a discussion around it.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, the question is that the motion be now put. No, that's not it. No, we're putting the flippant motion. The question is that a bylaw is not the most appropriate way of addressing the problem. As many who are of that opinion will say aye and raise their hands. Aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against say no and raise their hands. No. The ayes have it. Declare the ayes have it. Yes, I will actually read out. Thank you. Yes, I will read out for the audio recording if we can just repeat that. As many of that opinion will say aye and raise their hands so that I can read their names. Councillor Avery, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Hughes, Mayor Powell, Councillor Robson, Councillor Hollis. Those against will raise their hands and say no. Councillor Baldock, Councillor Morris, Councillor Granger, Councillor Kitty and Councillor Clout declare the motion carried. Okay, colleagues, it is nearly 10:30. My question to you now is, do you wish to have a 10-minute coffee and tea break before moving on with the agenda? Yes. Okay, let's do that. Okay, colleagues, before we move to page 6 of the agenda, which is the Resource Management Amendment Bill paper, would somebody be so kind as to move C on the previous agenda item that the attachment C remain confidential? Moved by Councillor Baldock, seconded by Councillor Hollis. Is there any discussion? Oh, no, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? The ayes have it. You wish to have a division? Okay, absolutely, yeah.
Point of clarification, the kaupapa in the previous triennium was that all votes are recorded. Is that the kaupapa for this triennium? Do we have I know we haven't got together to have that discussion, but I think it's really important for the record that people's votes are recorded so people don't get a chance to rewrite history.
That's a discussion we certainly have when we decide whether or not to adopt amended standing orders. It would be good to have that codified rather than as a common law kind of aspect of council procedure. But if for the minutes, if we could mention Councillor Robson has been against that, and I did not detect any other dissension in that regard. Moving to page 6, colleagues, we have Fiona Nalder and again Jeremy Bowes presenting to us on Council's submission to the Resource Management Amendment Bill. For clarity, this is staff seeking retrospective approval for that submission. It doesn't normally happen that way, but due to timeframes, it has occurred that way.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. My name's Fiona Nalder. We're bringing to you today a submission to approve, as Councillor Morris said, retrospectively. The purpose of the Resource Management Amendment Bill was enlarged to repeal changes made to the Resource Management Act by the Resource Legislation Amendment Act in 2017. This submission that we sent in focused particularly on those proposed changes that would impact on us as a council. And our primary concern was the proposed exception of the Ministry of Development and Ministry of Education from paying financial contributions. We made a case that this was not justified, was unfair and unequitable, didn't achieve the purposes of the proposed bill as it increases complexity, and is contrary to the intention of the Resource Management Act, as it prevents councils from being able to address environmental impacts caused by two development entities. And over the long term, we saw it as increasing costs for ratepayers or other developers, as the cost of infrastructure would still need to be met.
To add to that, it's the submission, the guts of the submission there is very consistent with the stance we've had with central government over many years to try and ensure that central government pays its fair share of the cost of growth in the city.
Questions, colleagues, from staff on this item? There is a question from Councillor Clout.
Thank you very much. On page 9 of our agenda, which is and page 2 of your submission. I just get mine moving. Why isn't that moving? Hold on, sorry about this. It makes reference to the fact that we went to court, the Environment Court this year. I don't recall being informed about that fact. I thought it would have been something that would be brought to our attention. I might be wrong, but I just don't recall it.
Through the Chair, my recollection is that was through the legal report. It was also updated in the council catch-ups. At the time.
Just for the record, can you explain the nature of that court proceeding, please? Just so everyone's aware.
It was a court proceeding with the Ministry of Education in terms of whether or not financial contributions could be charged under the RMA and the rationale for that. So we both agreed to go through the legal process to get a legal interpretation of the law, and that was in favour of council. So subsequent to that court case, then these supplementary order paper was put to the RMA, which would effectively remove the requirement for the Ministry of Education to pay financial contributions, which is why we're now submitting on the matter.
Thank you. Just so further to that, this then has nationwide implications, this particular ruling, so that will be welcomed by other councils, I'm sure.
The ruling would set a precedent, so we were seeking to apply it in the Tauranga area. But if the RMA Amendment Bill were to proceed in its current form, then that would override the court decision that we received, and that also would be applicable nationwide.
Councillor Baldock, you have a question?
Move if questions are finished.
Is that a question, Councillor Robson, or are you indicating a seconding of that?
Question.
Question, yes.
Through the chair to staff, can you give an indication of the value to Tauranga City Council and in effect to the ratepayers of the usage of that clause around financial contributions, say over the last year, 5 years, 10 years? What value has it provided, monetary value?
Sorry, I don't have that information because there's a number of sites, but for schools it's generally over $1 million. So that's just a rough order cost. We could give you more detail around them. So we're looking to charge development contributions, financial contributions in terms of water, wastewater and transportation.
Yeah, I suppose if we could get that information provided at some point in the future, the key point obviously is this is a significant issue.
Yeah, look, I think we can provide some detail of the particular case, what we had calculated those DCs at, and then that would give you an indication of every time we look to do this with the Ministry of Education or the initiation of a school, it would give you an indication.
Yeah, for clarification, the reason for the question is obviously to make the point that this is not a small technical issue.
No, it's worth millions.
Any further questions, colleagues? No, just make the observation we were briefed on that particular case in the council chamber in a confidential session. Councillor Baldock's indicated that he wishes to move.
Yeah, I'll just move A as according to the report.
Is there a seconder for that course of action? Seconded by Councillor Salisbury. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Baldock?
Well, I will, just to support the submission and strongly support it, as has been pointed out and extracted from by questions. The Ministry of Education is going to be building some significant schools in our region. As a growing city, we have a high school being proposed out in the south. We've got primary schools going on. The fact that we do not get a contribution from that is just not right. But this is what government will do. If they get beaten in court, they go and change the law, really. And that's not acceptable.
With no irony as to the previous agenda item, Councillor Salisbury, do you wish to speak? No? Any further speakers to the motion? I would simply reiterate Councillor Baldock and Councillor Robson's message. There is a significant cost to the ratepayer, particularly in terms of the Ministry of Education and their development of sites in our city, which ratepayers then have to pay for the servicing of. I do have some sympathy with regard to Ministry of Defence. It can actually be a life and death matter, and in terms of the Navy turning up, you know, for example, at the Port of Tauranga, they turn up, they don't pay any berthage fees, they've got the Crown prerogative, and that's just absolutely appropriate. That being said, I will put the motion. All those of that view, please say aye and raise your hands. That is unanimous. I think it's Councillor Granger, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Clout, Councillor Hollis, Councillor Robson, Mayor Powell, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Arbery and Councillor Morris. There is no against. The motion is carried. Let's now move, colleagues, to the policy program prioritisation on page 15. And speaking to that from staff, we have Ariel King and again, Mr. Jeremy Bowes. Welcome back.
Nothing else to do, I'll just come here. So the policy prioritisation program has got lots of P's in it. The intention of this is to put the policy program, so Ariel King is the team leader of policy. So the people who work in the policy team work directly to Ariel. The intention of the policy, the report is to put the policy program into your hands. So we will create what we think are things which need to happen, either because we've been hearing from the community about issues, or we've been hearing from our own staff, or because you've raised them around the council chambers. And we work through the executive team and say, is this a reasonable programme of work? But ultimately we come to this table because it's your policy programme. So what you've got in front of you is not just a tick-off process, it's actually a decision process. Do you want us to do this work? The attachment you've got has got a number of sections, and you just bear with me, I'll walk you through it for the first time. We bring this report to you approximately 6 months. So obviously for 6 of you this is the first time, but we'll bring it back to you again in 6 months' time, and again in 6 months, and again in 6 months, to make sure that the work is the work that you want us to be doing. So the first part of the attachment on page 18 is the stuff which is currently underway. Now, you clearly have the right to stop some of those things if you want to, but probably the boat has left on those. So all these pieces of work are underway at different stages, and on the right-hand side it'll tell you what stage we're at. We've been out for consultation for 2 or 3 things, and in the new year we'll start the hearings process and the deliberations on those pieces of work. That will include now the Street Use in Public Places bylaw as well, because that will go out for consultation starting tomorrow, and you'll have hearings in the new year, as the chair has already taken you through. Across onto page 20, there's another piece of work there. The last piece there is the underway one. You'll see that report later on this agenda. Then we've got a couple where we have worked through and said we recommend that we can start this piece of work sometime in the next 6 months. We can't tell you which day because it will depend on resources and how the other pieces of work go. And those two are they'd be fairly straightforward reviews, I expect. The Protected Disclosures Policy, which bounces off the Protected Disclosures Act, and our own risk management policy. They are in existence at the moment, but they're the sort of things you want to keep just refreshing over the time. So we'll just review those ones, including you in that review, clearly. The next pile is the 3 or 4 other things, 3 things which came up during the conversations, but the team and the executive team have prioritised as not being as important as the 2 which were prioritised. So if we wanted to pick up 1 or more of these pieces of work, we probably would try and prioritise something else out because of the capacity issue. And then on page 21, for completeness, you've got the very long list of things which have been completed in the last 6 months, which is 1. Partly because we lost a few meetings for the election process. And then the same sort of approach to the bylaws, where you've got the Street Use in Public Places bylaw, so that's now underway. The speed limit bylaw will start once we've done this, the transport team have done the citywide review of speed, and the alcohol control bylaw, there's just a little tweak which the council meeting after this meeting will just address. So that's where it's come from. The other purpose for this meeting perhaps is for you to raise some conversations about other policies which might find their way into this list in 6 months' time. Just start that conversation. What about this here? What about that issue?
Thank you for that. We'll adapt standing orders to make that process easy. Councillor Baldock, do you have a question? Okay. Councillor Salisbury, and then Councillor Baldock, then Councillor Arbery.
I just have a question around when we're going to review our procurement policy. I noticed that we do have a little bit of local focus in there, but I'm wondering if we could look at perhaps some more robust language around local focus for procurement, and maybe even looking at how we could increase capability building in industries so we can retain some of our spend in our region.
Question for this committee is that something you want to add on to the list to start with in the next 6 months, or is it just something we want to percolate? And if we add things on, what we'll probably do as staff is go, can we take something off as well? And that's then judgment call.
So is it something that is set to be reviewed, or is it something we could put on the agenda for 6 months' time?
There's no current plan.
Yeah, through the chair. It's a conversation that the executive have been having over the last couple of weeks, and we're proposing to have someone look at particularly the procurement of our large projects and our processes around that. And so this is something that we could include as that part of work as well.
Councillor Baldock.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The speed limit bylaw review, just concerned that the status there on the form says not started, but in actual fact, in theory, because the staff are working on the review, it in fact is underway. We haven't formally gone out to consult, but we're expecting that to happen soon, are we not? When will we get to the point of consulting on that? Because I think we gave some indications before the election that with the Mount issue and the Post-Par Road issue, we were going to be getting there before the end of the year.
So the pre-work has started, so they have to go through that process of looking at the speeds, and then once they've looked at that, that then becomes an input to a bylaw review. So the bylaw review hasn't started, and they're doing the pre-work.
Are we on track for the end of the year? I think it was dependent on someone being employed, wasn't it, to resource or?
There is some work underway that is commencing in terms of public engagement.
My favourite issue. Yes, it's completed because we said we can't do anything by way of policy. It's a city plan issue with the notable trees. But I understand that there is still a report coming back about the trees in Wakefield Drive, which were the subject or the catalyst for that conversation. Could I get an update on that?
Through the Chair, coming back to committee prior to Christmas.
Councillor Arbery.
As a new councillor, it's hard to know exactly what all the policies are that council has that as councillors we're supposed to enact. So something that'd be quite useful for me and is a policy register, a compilation of all our policies and with associated dates of when they're to be renewed or looked at again. And I'd also just like to see us councillors working with staff on a housing policy. I think that should be a priority.
Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it's really to make the point perhaps slightly more technically than Councillor Arbery just made it, that I think it's difficult to agree this prioritisation if you don't know what the policies are, that these policies are being addressed in preference to. So it would have been helpful, I believe, with this report for us to have a list of the policies, when they were last reviewed, when they're scheduled to be reviewed, so one could have a picture in which one could place these questions and decisions. And you know, I know it's a difficult thing and you don't want to sort of overburden people with information, but at the moment I feel we're operating a little bit without a context.
Yes, since I started here at Tauranga City Council, that's one of the projects that we've actually been working on, is putting that register together. So I'm calling it the one source of the truth, so that I know where all the policies are and when they're due for review, and we can bring that to you for your review as well.
If you want to get ahead of the curve, forgetting the when they're due for review bit, but all the policies are on the website, so you simply go to Council's website and type in the word policies, and the policies, the current policies and the bylaws are all there.
Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering whether the projects, I don't know how this fits into policy, but to enable us to have better tracking and of projects so that everybody in the community and the council knows where projects are at over time. Does that, I don't know where that sits, but it's just something I wanted to...
That would actually sit within Councillor Clout's chair of the Project Services Operations Committee, which is coming up shortly, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Any further questions, colleagues? Councillor Robson, and then Councillor Hughes.
Just supporting Councillor Hughes. From a policy perspective, I think one of the things we're lacking is a policy around transparency on projects, information, how it's communicated to the public. So a framework for that communication. The idea that the public only find out what's going on within the agenda of a PSOC committee and if something isn't there, it's really, really hard for the public to understand what's happening. I know there was some work done recently in a project over a weekend that was focused very much in this area. At any time, the public could gain some insight as to what's happening inside the machine, and perhaps it's a bit like sausages, you know, you don't really want to know, but for those that have got a strong stomach, the ability to view where we are in certain projects, to be as public and as transparent as possible. I think that there is a place in the policy space for such a position to be taken. So I don't know whether PSOC is the answer to the question that's being asked, I suppose.
A reminder, just inflect your voice at the end, so it sounds like a question. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you.
So what was the result of his question?
Thank you,
So he was-
Councillor,
what-
recognising as such.
Yes. Councillor Robson is proposing. Actually, I think look, it's best when I say nothing at all. Councillor Robson, would you answer your own
I'm asking the question with insufficient inflection from my tone-deaf chair, that I think there is a need for a policy around, you know, transparency in terms of process on projects and public information, communication, etc. And I think that's the space. So I think, you know, we should be looking at a policy on that, because I think we should be giving guidance to staff about how open we are. I've already made the point in an earlier motion that I believe we lack transparency, and often there's no justification for such.
Okay, before we move something, colleagues, I just want to check generally, are colleagues happy with what the prioritisation is? Now, I would make the observation that certainly starting in December, we're going to go away and we'll be looking at the community outcomes that we want to consult with our city on, and that those should actually inform eventually what our policy prioritisation is. But I just put the question, colleagues, is everybody generally comfortable with what is in there? Because if we're not and we want to bring something forward, something essentially has to fall out. Is there general comfort? Nobody's violently opposed. Councillor Aubrey.
I would like background work on a housing policy to begin.
Okay, from the chair, the best way to ensure that work begins is obviously through our conversation in December, but you may like to move that. Hello. you may like to move that the council, or that the committee recommends that council staff begin preliminary work on a what was the name of the proposed policy? Housing policy. Yes, you may. Yeah, Councillor Baldock.
I just would suggest that we have a committee called the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, where our staff are very, very busy, and most of what they're working on is housing-related policy, housing-related outcomes. It may seem like a policy might expedite it, but I seriously think they're pretty snowed under with trying to get that stuff through. Maybe when we get more familiar with what's going on in that program, and it'll be coming up in the next meeting, you could then see whether it's something you wanted to pursue urgently or whether it will just take course. And that's only advice, honestly. But
Powell.
Can I just clarify, through you, Chair, Councillor Aubrey, you're talking about social housing, I presume, not housing in general. Is that correct, or am I?
Through you, the Chair, that's not correct. So I'm proposing something similar to what Christchurch has, and they have the housing continuum with, it's basically a direction from the councillors on what they'd like to see the staff, or the direction they're taking with housing in general.
I would suggest that we have the conversation, first of all, at the Urban Form and Transport Committee, but also in December when we're talking about those community outcomes. Does that answer satisfy you, Councillor? In as much as it can.
Yes, I'm happy to proceed with this. Just wanted to put that on the table.
Okay, colleagues, somebody prepared to move the prioritisation as outlined, moved by Councillor Clout, seconded by Mayor Powell. Councillor Clout, you wish to speak to
Just very briefly, thank you, staff, for putting this together. Clearly, there are a lot of policies that we do undertake as a council, and we do have to review them. The idea of having the full list and a schedule of dates when they are to be reviewed, I think, is helpful. And so, I mean, we could always fiddle around the edges with some of the prioritisation, but I think the staff have got it pretty well sorted.
Second, Mayor Powell, do you wish to speak?
I was really just going to reiterate what Councillor Clout said, just to thank the staff for all the hard work on this, so thank you, Chair.
Speaking to it myself, I'd just reiterate to colleagues that the next time the policy prioritisation comes to us, hopefully be informed by the discussions that we're having in December and subsequently in public regarding community outcomes for our city. Councillor Baldock?
Just a quick note in regard to the transparency and openness and so on. I think that's called the Local Government Act and the Goima and so on. You know, we have instructions about our openness and transparency pretty clear.
Sorry, Councillor Robson.
You could see it coming, Mr. Chair, could you not? The Goima, I refer you to the recent report on Christchurch City Council. I have a draft email that will be going to the Chief Executive asking for his comments on an upcoming investigation of our ability in that space and how he thinks we might fare and the broader topics as well. I think we would be well served to see the LGA as a framework, but maybe to set standards that actually, how can I put it, endear us to our community rather than, I'm sure, Christchurch's defence with they obeyed the Local Government Act. So yeah, there's work to be done in this space. I just advise that I will abstain on the grounds that it's not a criticism of the work that's been done, but without a framework of what the policies are, I think we're sort of going too early on this. I think we should have the discussion first. And I know the work's proceeding anyway, so, but it's just really a statement about the order in which we should be doing things.
Councillor Hughes.
Can I just clarify then that so this piece right now is all underway and they're proceeding forward, and we basically need to work with them because they're full and this is their time frame for things. And then in 6 months' time, over the next 6 months, we'll be able to have influence over where we go from here.
That is absolutely correct, Councillor Hughes. Yeah, the work is underway. Staff are informing us what they're currently up to, whether there are any red flags, but certainly in 6 months' time we'll have hopefully, a much clearer idea about our particular prioritisation as it sits. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further speakers? No. Councillor Clout, do you wish to exercise right of reply? No. I will now put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Councillor Morris, Councillor Aubrey, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Hughes, Mayor Powell, Councillor Clout, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Granger. Those against, please raise your hands. Abstentions? Councillor Robson and Councillor Hollis. I declare it carried. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, colleagues, the proposed approach to the annual plan, page 22. And speaking to that report, we have Joel Peters. Speaking to the presentation, Christine Jones.
I'll provide an overview and then the team will be able to respond to any questions. So just the purpose of this report really is to inform elected members about the approach that's been taken to the annual plan itself. It's not to work through any detail of the annual plan. That will come at a subsequent discussion. So the Local Government Act sets out the planning framework for all local authorities. We're required to do a long-term plan every 3 years and an annual plan in the 2 intervening years. This is coming up 2020 to 21 is year 3, so it's the last year of the existing LTP, and then we'll be moving into creating a new LTP. Under the legislation, what the annual plan needs to do is to define and disclose the differences between the adopted year 3 and the long-term plan and what the council would be proposing through the annual plan. And it sets the direction for the year, and effectively is like your contract for delivery with the community. So you're saying, here's what we're going to deliver. You're also saying, here's where we're going to source our funds from, here's where we're going to spend our funds, and here's how we're going to manage our balance sheet. So it tells the financial and the non-financial picture of the council for the coming year. The long-term plan had within it a series of priorities. Those priorities, unless there's any different direction from this group of councillors, would be continued. It's around managing growth, investing in transport and travel choice, dealing and managing and planning around natural hazards, trying to protect and manage the quality of our environment, particularly in respect of wastewater and stormwater, and providing amenity opportunities. So they were sort of some of the benchmarks or principles that underpinned the investment choices that the council made through the last LTP process. Since that LTP is adopted, some of the things that have changed, and which will be the core reasons for variances flowing through, is there have been changes to the costs of projects and the timeframes for projects, particularly capital projects. Some of that is because of the phase of the planning that the projects were in when they were put into the budget, which is now nearly some 3.5 years ago. Some of it's a reflection of what's happening out in the industry in terms of the escalation of costs that impacting every entity that's doing major capital projects. The revenue is less than what we had anticipated through the LTP, so our development contributions are less. We've received less NZTA subsidy because NZTA had changed the framework and the approach to funding. So there was some choices that this council made about which projects it would continue with and which it would fund the shortfall of NZTA funding through rates, and some projects were deferred because of the lack of NZTA funding. And operational expenditure, some changes were made by council resolution in terms of operational expenditure. The most significant being an increased investment in the planning resource, and more recently, just prior to the election, the decision to approve $3 million for the Tauranga System Plan, which is a multimodal transport plan for our city, which covers both state highways and local roads. So that was something that wasn't in the adopted LTP budget, but subsequently has been approved by council. So just in terms of the approach and the timelines and what you can expect to see coming to you, as said today is just to give you a really quick snapshot. On the 10th of December, the team will be bringing to you a draft financial indicative budget together with issues and options for you to consider about the way forward and what you want to include and exclude in terms of your delivery to the community. There may be some further work through January, February, depending on where you get to with that, and looking then to provide a draft budget in around about that mid-February timeframe, which will be refined, and we'll be coming back with a second series of issues and options based on the direction that you set on the 10th of December. That would then be formally adopted in March, and we need to undergo public consultation, so it would be a special consultative process, which is a 30-day minimum period. You'd receive submissions from the community, you'll hear those submissions, you'll deliberate and make decisions on the matters that have been submitted to by the community, and you have a statutory obligation to adopt your final annual plan before the end of June. You don't have any legal ability to strike your rate until the annual plan has actually been adopted. So that's why, and you really need to hit it by that statutory deadline, which we've always done, but that's why the timeframes are what they are. And then you communicate, and then the organisation will go ahead in terms of delivering the actual adopted plan. That was the last slide. So the Catherine, myself, or the team are happy to answer any specific questions.
Colleagues, questions for staff? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. This is quite a sort of specific question. You mentioned the transport system network. The work that goes into that, is that OPEX or can it be capitalised at some point in the future?
The work in preparing the plan will be OPEX, but we did pass a resolution in terms of the funding. The work that comes out of it in terms of the projects and initiatives would be included in your LTP decision-making process, and anything that you decided to invest in, most of that would likely to be capital in terms of the investment. Catherine will talk about the funding.
So just to confirm, Council, normally operational costs are funded through operational revenue. The previous Council made a decision to fund that additional transport work through a loan because it has kind of yields a benefit over a number of years. So the operational cost, if you like, the rating impact of that was the debt retirement. There's associated with that expenditure is a kind of 10-year debt retirement, and so that is the part that is rates funded.
Councillor Baldock.
Just the issues and options that will come in December. How specific, how sort of trend setting are they going to be? Just considering what we're all going to understand by then, or are they pretty broad parameters that we'll still review after? Because having the Christmas break is often a great time to reflect on a lot of things, and
so it'll be similar to previous years. So there's no sort of major significant issues. So it'll be probably more about broad fiscal issues. And there might be some choices within that, but there's not major things that we've got on our list that need to come back. Yeah, that's cool. So there may be some issues around curbside. And we're already working on the timing of that, so most of that implementation will be further out. So we thought we would be partway through in the 20 to 21. It's likely to be further, so that's going to be a change from what's presented in the LTP. It's those types of things. So we'll give a summary of the significant shifts from what was adopted and what was in the LTP and why. Most of those will be pretty self-explanatory, and some of them there may be sort of more choice around, so they'll come up as issues at papers for you.
Councillor Hughes.
Just so I remember last year there was the information centre came into the annual plan. So that project, so projects like that you're saying, I guess Larry's just spoken to it, but there's no actual projects that are sitting in there waiting to. It's all going to be broad. Where does the information centre sit now? Does that come back into those kind of projects, say? Whatever it is, a hockey field or those big things that come in, do they come in? Yeah.
If those projects were scheduled in the LTP to be in year 3, so we would have been planning them already. Some projects would already be moving into delivery. Some projects we may be starting with a view for them to being predominantly in that year. So if there was a previous council direction for them to be in that year, they will flow through into that year. That's clearly a decision for this group of elected councillors as to whether or not you wish to retain it there, or if you wish to prioritise other projects and bring them forward. What we would say though is most of that prioritisation and major choices ideally should flow through the LTP process once you've done the visioning work and you've got clear about what you want to achieve in the long term. It's very hard to significantly shift the direction of the ship by March for projects that you need to be starting work on by 1 July. So the time frames are generally longer. So a lot of the stuff that will be physically delivered from 1 July 2020 will already be well into the planning phase in terms of getting resource consents and detailed design and all of those types of things. So it's more where we're doing some preparatory work that will then flow into the LTP, which are things like the Tauranga System Plan, which will bring back to you to say which of these projects do you wish to pursue, what order of priority do you wish to pursue them, and how do you want to spread them across your 10-year plan or beyond.
Thank you.
Council also always reserves the right to chuck the spanner in the works. That being said, in terms of of other projects that may crop up, we're of course going to consult with our community March, April, and as a result of some of the things that they bring to us, we may adjust the the annual plan, the final annual plan. Any further questions from colleagues? A question from myself. Personally, it'd be quite helpful when I think it's the 10th of December meeting comes around and those first set of figures are shown to us. Personally, for me, and perhaps for other colleagues as well, it would be quite helpful to see the average residential rate increase proposed. Can we have those numbers available for the 10th of December meeting?
Yes, we will have that information. Also, if you recall, in the LTP, there were some decisions around moving to a higher commercial differential, and so that information will also be presented to you.
Councillor Clout.
Thank you. That prompts another question. Will we have the most up-to-date inflation figures alongside that budget, please?
Yes, and we'll also update the growth figures.
Councillor Salisbury.
So outside of the public submissions, do we have a process that engages the community around priority setting for the long-term plan or the annual plan?
Most certainly, I think that would be the ambition of all colleagues to do that towards it's basically as soon as the annual plan is signed off. I would suggest that we need to start engaging our community informally and then formally to seek their direction as to what priorities we should do. But there's going to be a communications plan along those lines, correct?
So in terms of the annual plan, there's no pre-engagement proposed for that because it's really, as I said, year 3 of an LTP. So where we're working with particular stakeholders that may feed through, but otherwise it's through the formal consultation process. In terms of the LTP, I think we may have reported to you about the work that we're doing in terms of the vision and survey, which is the first up, and then we'll be coming back to talk to yourselves about how you wish to progress that, how you would like to engage with the community, what conversations for the LTP. So that'll be in the new year, we'll talk about that. And so you've got pretty much most of calendar year 2020 to work on the preparation of the LTP, and we'd be looking towards sort of the September, October to start to be collating that together into a cohesive draft document.
In terms of accepting the report, Councillor Baldock's indicated that he wishes to move. Is there a seconder for that course of action? Councillor Kitty, do you wish to speak to it, Councillor
Just
Baldock?
brief approach to the annual plan. Looking forward to this ride with our new colleagues. It's a wonderful thing how we work through it all. Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Councillor Kitty is seconder. Do you wish to speak to it? Any further speakers? No. That being the case, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands and say aye. Councillor Morris, Councillor Granger, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Clout, Councillor Hollis, Councillor Robson, Mayor Powell, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Aubrey. That is unanimous. I declare it carried. Okay, colleagues, if we now move to the next item on the agenda, we've of course dealt with 7.4 and skipping ahead to page 128 of the agenda. Staff will speak to their recommendations and we can ask some questions, but what I'm proposing we do so that we deal with this in an orderly fashion is that once questions have concluded, we move through issue by issue, and if I can have a mover and seconder for each recommendation or something different, or that would be great. We'll move through that way. So over to staff.
So kia ora, Chairperson, Mayor and Councillors. So this report is the elected members' expenses and resources policy. It's guided by a determination issued by the Remuneration Authority. So there gives some general guidelines, and within that policy there's discretion for councils to whether they accept the recommendation of the determination or not. So either you have to or you may do something. This policy is asking which expenses council would like to claim of those that the Remuneration Authority allows you to claim. So just happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. That answers the question I had straight off the bat. Any other questions, colleagues? No? Oh, Councillor Robson.
there's a list of expenses here. Is it within the gift of council to say something along the lines of, hypothetically speaking, to make a decision, so it's through the chair to staff, I assume, that we don't provide free parking? Is that within the gift of council, just for clarification?
Correct. If that was the wish of the committee, it could be added to the policy. The policy at the moment notes that you have a car park allocated at a car park. We're suggesting it be specified to the Willow Street car park, but in terms of other car parking, you may want to say if you're parking on Cameron Road outside 306, you don't have a free car park or anything like that. So you could.
Thank you.
If you wish to deal with that today, in terms of the policy, we can come to that at the end after we work through the different options. Okay, colleagues, moving to issue 1, the payment of a childcare allowance. Is there somebody prepared to move an option there? Option 1.1 is recommended.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, you may. Yes, Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering how these policies align with what the policies are for the staff in Tauranga City Council.
Good question. Chief Executive.
They don't.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's possibly a bit unfair. So there is, there is a, obviously there's a contractual relationship with staff in terms of remuneration and benefits, which is either negotiated individually with an employee or through a collective bargaining agreement with a union.
So, just to clarify, such things as childcare, mileage, etc., it would be quite. I'd like to think that we were aligned with the staff. I don't know how anyone else feels about that, but I don't think, from my perspective, that would be my desire, is to be aligned with what our staff is doing.
I'll treat that as a question, and that's right. And
Look, I think that would be difficult because we have a whole range of individual agreements, and it's governed by essentially New Zealand employment law, whereas I don't believe this is. So this is something different. So.
Okay, colleagues, questions exhausted or not? Is there a mover for?
Well, question, I think.
Okay, question from Councillor Baldock, then Councillor Clout.
I mean, as we go through the table, there are some things which are reimbursements of expenses. For example, the mayor goes somewhere, flies to Wellington, has to get a taxi into town and so on, those sorts of things. Most people would understand are part of the job. But then there are others which are more related to us here in the city. And given the increase allotted to us by the Remuneration Authority, that the salaries have gone up a lot, it is an option to consider that we waive them. And so it's, rather than going through one at a two, could we possibly have a conversation about that as a block, and see what the feeling is of everybody.
Look, I will put it to the test. Are colleagues happy to work through them one by one or one by one? Is that the desire of the committee? Okay, we'll continue on that course of action. In terms of the childcare allowance, is there a mover for that? Another question, sorry, Councillor Clout.
So the question was, is there anyone around this table who this actually refers to now? Or is it something for the future that we're discussing?
That's a good question. I'm just considering whether I allow it. I will allow it, and it's up to colleagues whether they wish to answer that question. Councillor Hollis, are you giving an answer?
I'd like to answer. If it's for the future and we're talking about diversity on this... No, I don't think so. I'm just going to answer it. That allowing childcare for, somebody that here is a solo parent, in fact, this week, had my children been younger, that would have been a major decision about whether I came and sat at this chamber. And that would be a major decision for a lot of people in the community to not put their hand up. So I think it is a thing that ought to be there for some people sometimes.
And in reality too, one never knows what tomorrow brings, and there have been several by-elections over the last decade or so as a result of all sorts of actions, people being elected to Parliament or passing away. Is that another question, Councillor Hollis? Councillor Baldock has indicated... No, that was the previous agenda item. Councillor Clout, you're happy to move the childcare allowance, and that's a recommendation as written. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Aubrey. You wish to speak to it, Councillor
Very
Clout?
briefly, Councillor Hollis hit the nail on the head. If we do want a greater representation, particularly of people who wouldn't normally be able to come and take on this role or this job, then anything that we can do to help ease that transition, the better. So I'm more than happy to support this particular recommendation.
Do you wish to speak?
Sure. I'm not aware that this does apply to anyone and doesn't apply to me, but just echo that comment that you do never know. We should be encouraging people, if they have young kids, to stand for council. So providing this is a good idea, in my opinion.
Other speakers? Councillor Baldock.
We are here for 3 years. I don't think it's likely to happen in my circumstances, but you never know what could happen.
I seem to recall a lady by the name of Sarah. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I'll vote in support of this. I think the Remuneration Authority made a specific change to their rules. They looked at this, and quite clearly the idea is to promote diversity. And the very fact that it doesn't seem to apply to any of us is a pretty interesting statement about how representative we are as a group. So I would also make the observation, however, that I think the Remuneration Authority erred, because people may have other dependents who don't fit the description of child, for instance, someone disabled but over the age of 18, which could be equally discriminatory. And I just noticed that we've gone down a pretty sort of narrow, cisgendered, heteronormative, ignore the disabled sort of view of the world that we often get out of central government. So, but yeah, happy to support it.
I think you're speaking to it. I would make the observation that perhaps somebody around the table does fall into that category but may not choose to use it. Okay, I will now no further speakers, I will now put the motion. All those in favour, look, this is getting a bit tedious, reading everybody's names out, so I'll deal with it by exception. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That is unanimous, that is carried. Moving on to the second issue, the mileage allowance. There are two options in the table there. One, pay the mileage allowance, which is the status quo. Two, do not provide for mileage allowance payment. And I would, from the chair, perhaps add in there a third option, and that is provide for a mileage allowance payment outside of the city limits. So if a member is travelling to Auckland or wherever on work, I think that it is only fair that they be allowed to claim that mileage. So I am therefore actually going to move that from the chair, that Council provides for a mileage allowance outside of the city limits. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Kitty. I have actually spoken to that and moving it, so seconder, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah. I just needed to make sure that we can clarify what the city limits are also, just so that everyone's aware of that.
City limits, as I would define them in terms of the policy, would be as in the territorial authority area. And we saw parts of where the city limits were yesterday when we were up Belk Road, for example. So that is seconded. Other speakers? Councillor Robson.
I will be voting against what's proposed. There is a tax break available to people. You can claim via your tax return, effectively tax deductible costs for travel, and as such you impose, by doing that, no burden on the ratepayer, other than very, very, very indirectly by actually taking something back from central government. But it's a practice I've always followed, and I think in the light of the significant increase in incomes we have and thinking about the alignment we have with staff, so I'll be voting against it.
Councillor Baldock.
Question first, the outside the city limits, does that mean the mileage starts from when you hit the boundary, or, because actually leaving home and going to Rotorua is I would think it's pretty standard practice if you're going there.
Yeah, I did think about that. There are two ways of thinking about it. One is that on a normal day's work you would travel around the city limits, maybe to the city limit. I live almost on the city limit, so it would be from the boundary. In terms of calculating that though, Google Maps is the easiest way of calculating the distance. So perhaps a better definition would be the first 30 kilometres would not be claimable. And so I pose the question to colleagues, is that getting messy in terms of the... Okay. Can I ask for some clarification from staff? If I can ask staff a question, in terms of my proposal that people claim from leaving the city limits, now that is difficult to measure. It is easier to have a particular number in there. Is there any advice from staff on that issue in terms of not whether it's right or not, but what would the easiest way be to claim mileage? Is there an existing internal policy that we could perhaps echo? Is there any advice from
I'm going to defer to Coral, who may be able to advise on this.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's usually from the person's home, from the councillor's home, and then it's much easier from our point of view.
And I am happy. I think the it's if a councillor is if when we're wording the policy, if a councillor is travelling out of town, and I think we can absolutely trust ourselves in terms of the implementation of that policy. So I think that would be, as the mover, I would be suggesting that it's for out of town mileage. And a member may claim that from their house. Seconder, would you be happy to accept that rather than the perhaps cumbersome to implement outside the city limits wording?
Absolutely, way easier.
Fantastic. Okay, so that is what we're in a sense debating now. Any further speakers to that? Councillor Baldock.
Briefly, just in response to Councillor Robson's opposition to it, I think I might have to change my accountant, because I've never been advised by them that I could claim mileage for what I do as a councillor, but I'm happy to be having that discussion afterwards, but I'll support the motion. I think it's a good one.
Thank you, colleagues. No further debate on that. Right of reply? No, I just want to say thank you, colleagues, for a little bit of flexibility there in defining the terms. So I will now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. Against, please raise your hands. Those against, I'll read out those against. Councillor Hollis, Councillor Robson and Councillor Hughes. The remainder are in favour. There are no abstentions. It is therefore carried. Moving on now to issue 3, the travel time allowance. The recommendation there is that a travel time allowance be paid to people travelling. What is the committee's view of that? Is somebody prepared to move that or essentially move the opposite of that? Councillor Clout is moving that we do not pay a travel time allowance to members. That's seconded by Councillor Robson. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor
Well,
Clout?
it's very simple. We all get paid a very reasonable salary. Some would say over generous salary, and that obviously includes the time that we're travelling. So,
Councillor Robson, you wish to speak? No. Reserve. Any further comments from colleagues on that course of action? No. Myself, I agree with it. Do you wish to speak now, Councillor Robson? No. You wish to reply, Councillor Clout? No. I will then put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands and say aye. Aye. That is unanimous. Moving on then to the next issue, which is the use of taxi services, and the proposed amendment is that moving with the times, we allow people to claim ride sharing services as an alternative to taxis. Is somebody prepared to move that recommendation or something else? Yes, Councillor Robson, you may ask a question.
Yeah, those familiar with ride-sharing services will understand sometimes the impact of surge pricing, and they can be outrageously expensive. And I just wonder how we might deal with the situation where someone decides to pick up an Uber on a rainy Friday afternoon from Auckland Council to Manukau to catch a flight, and we wind up with a bill of $200. I just, how are we going to deal with that sort of exception situation?
If I can answer from the chair and then seek further guidance from colleagues, I would suggest and say that I would say that colleagues would actually be eminently reasonable in that regard. I think that they would be cognizant of surge pricing, particularly as it pertains to Uber and different circumstances, that they would choose a more affordable option, such as Councillor Baldock and my ride to Auckland via bus and train and scooter. So that would be my answer to that question. Any further guidance from colleagues? No, I think everybody would be sensible and honourable in that regard. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Clout, and you are moving.
Sorry, can I just get clarification?
Yes,
this is
you may.
for anything out of town. We're not talking about in Tauranga City? Yeah.
That would be the practice, yes. But look, to be fair, if somebody found themselves in a situation where they were unable to drive and were unable to find a colleague to pick them up, then we may have to make allowances for that, as we have done in the past.
Page 138 of your agenda, 5.1.3 has got the bits at the moment. So it talks about, for the following reasons, work is past a reasonable hour, safety reasons or similar, or when outside Tauranga on council business.
So that's moved by Councillor Clout, seconded by Councillor Hollis. Wish to speak to it, Councillor
we're just basically moving with the times and recognising different providers.
Seconded, do you wish to speak now? Nope. Other speakers? No. Yes, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, in the light of modal shift, there's no invocation here to request that councillors use public transport as a priority. So that should be the first choice. Is that the intent of the mover? That
I'd be happy to include, public transport costs alongside taxis, or not as a priority. I mean, if it was feasible, though, I think that would be. I've sometimes taken the bus from Wellington Airport into the city.
Councillor Robson, if you wish to make a directive of that point, you may wish to move an amendment, and you don't have to think about that now. I'm happy to move to another speaker. Councillor Baldock.
Has the mover spoken to it?
Yes.
He did? Oh, okay. I just think it's sensible. I don't think we should impose a requirement to seek out public transport. Sometimes there are, this is generally when you're on council business, you're out of town, and, we took a train, didn't we, and a bus and so on, but we had plenty of time to kill. If you've got to get to a meeting or something, then it's, and people just need to have the discretion to choose the best thing.
So, look, Councillor Kitty.
I was just about to say that, surely we've got some common sense around the table that we don't need to discuss a bus or a scooter or something, that we can just get on with this. And I think we're all intelligent enough to do what's best we are all elected to do the best for the community. So I think that that's what we should just remember.
Certainly concur. Any further speakers to that? No. Then right a reply, Councillor Clout? Nope. I will then put the motion that 4.1. All those in favour, please raise your hands and say aye. All those against, please raise your hands. Abstentions, please raise your hands. Abstention from Councillor Robson. Moving to the next issue, issue 5, accommodation expenses, and this, the recommendation is to allow a payment for private accommodation, which potentially could actually save the ratepayer. So there's a question from Councillor Clout on that.
Thank you. I'm absolutely in favour of this prospect because I believe it will reduce costs. But just the question is there a staff policy currently on this, this prospect or not?
Yeah, I think there is, and it's very similar. Yeah.
That's the question because there's an X dollars there, so it would be good, helpful to, if we do pass this, that it lines up with the same level.
I don't know that there is a number actually, no.
What I would suggest, and I'm happy for someone else to move it, that you put in $100 then. If somebody wanted to move that, that's what I would suggest. So is there anybody prepared to move 5.1 with a number in there? Yes, you may, Councillor Hollis.
So we were talking about ride sharing in Uber. Does this include Airbnb and such and shared accommodation? So if we're all going to a place, we just throw in and get a place instead of all staying in hotels. Well, I'm looking forward to the Walrus like next to me, but
That's certainly, again, this is trying to be, pardon the pun, trying to accommodate other measures other than going into individual hotel rooms, yes.
Yeah, it would be seldom that you're all away together. And just say that. Look, I actually think the policy's fine. It's been like this for the last decade or so, never been abused, and I don't anticipate it would be.
Okay, look, just to provide some direction, I would happily move 5.1 and I would put in a figure of $100 just so that it is clear. Is there a seconder for that course of action? Seconded by Councillor Robson. Speaking to it, I would suggest that, look, sometimes people may be able to stay with family, may prefer to stay with family, and they may not necessarily choose to claim that. But then, if it does provide a burden, they may choose to claim it. And I think that, as Councillor Kitty said earlier on, we leave that to individual members' honour and discretion, and I think they will do that well. It actually has the ability here to actually save ratepayers a bob, and that's a good thing. The second, Councillor Robson, do you wish to speak to it? Any other speakers? You're still reserving. There is no right to reply from me on that. I will put that. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those against, please raise your hands. Abstentions? No, that is carried unanimously. Continuing on through the policy to issue 6. Now, I just had a question in terms of the wording of issue 6 for my own clarification. Is it proposed that if an elected member goes away and gets some professional development, that is approved by the mayor or chief, because there are 2 recommended options there, the top one's not recommended, but is 6.1 in fact recommended as well? Yeah. There are 2 recommended options, 6.2 and 6.3. But I'm just wondering whether 6.1 is indeed recommended as well. That's what it kind of felt like. It is?
Correct, sorry.
Okay,
It's
that's
not been
good.
added, but yeah.
No, thank you for that. Is there a mover, starter for 10 on 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3? Yes, you may ask a question, Councillor Robson.
The opening sentence of paragraph 16, the current policy delegates approval for conference attendance to the mayor and or deputy mayor. And this is around the idea of conference attendance stroke professional development. We had last triennium a councillor take 6 weeks absence without leave. As far as I know, there was no sanction imposed. And I hope their charity benefited well from the actions of that former elected member. But my question relates to the sort of broader or underlying assumption that what about if someone wants to undertake professional development and is not seeking to claim finances but doesn't feel the need to seek leave? In other words, they're happy to, on their own recognizance, on their own decision, seek professional development or attend a conference. That may be a conference, for instance, that challenges a policy decision of the council, and the mayor would feel compromised for allowing someone to go to that, but the councillor feels that it's the right thing to do for the city. So it's just, what are the assumptions in that leave calculation? So this relates to the decision before claiming expenses, but just implicit in that is a question for me.
Absolutely.
Very much for me.
I get the, I get in terms of the wording where there may be some ambiguity in that. My understanding of it, and I think it would be the plain English understanding of it as written, is that if a colleague is seeking to get some professional development which is paid for by the ratepayer as opposed to paid for by themselves, then that would of course trigger the requirement for approval from the mayor and or chief executive. Whereas if somebody wants to do something on their own bat, well, that's their business. Yeah. Any further questions, colleagues, on any of those recommendations? No. Can I have someone move that or something else, please? Moved by Councillor Aubrey. That's 6.1, point 2 and point 3. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hughes. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Aubrey? Seconder, do you wish to speak? Any other speakers to that course of action? No. I will then put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Clearly raise your hand. Thank you. Aye. That is carried unanimously. Fantastic. Moving on to issue 7, which is the same question, really. Someone prepared to move that. Moved by Councillor Clout, seconded by Councillor Aubrey. Yes, you can answer the question.
The policy currently notes that councillors may attend conferences upon obtaining the relevant approval. Isn't that counter to what was just outlined to me in response to the question I asked in relation to issue 6? Yes.
30 seconds to just reflect on that. Staff, do you wish to comment as to what issue 7 is seeking to address?
Simply expands the current wording, which talks only about conferences, to conferences and professional development. In other words, professional development beyond a conference.
Mayor Pell, question?
Thank you, and thanks for that clarification. Can I ask what precedence has been set in this regard, just as context for council, by way of professional development or conferences?
I can speak to the last 6 years. Certainly the last 3, there has been none, which in my view was lacking. There was none over the last 3 years. In 3 years before that, I believe one colleague went on there's of course the Local Government New Zealand conference, but that aside, other such things, I believe one colleague went on some training, but it has been lacking in my view, and certainly over the last 3 years been completely absent.
Thank you. So we've got an example coming forward where we are all effectively going on professional development in early December. Is it an exemplar to use? Is this the only example we have, in fact?
Yes, so far. However, there are opportunities for councillors to attend professional development opportunities, including Institute of Director courses, and those are the sorts of things that perhaps Coral can build up a list of opportunities that council might consider over the term of this triennium that might provide some opportunities for personal and professional development, which would support their roles as councillors.
Yes, continuing to answer the question, yeah, Councillor Baldock.
Well, the RMA Commissioner training would be considered professional development, but it falls probably in the earlier ones. You get approval for it because it's paid for by council and so on. So I think it's covered by that, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I'd echo those comments. Even if people are not wishing to be on the hearings panel, that Commissioner's training is valuable to all members and would be a good form of professional development. So, is anybody prepared to move 7.1 to clarify that? We're amending the policy to go beyond just conferences to entail professional development as well. Moved by Councillor Clout, seconded by Councillor Hollis. Any discussion? Seconder? No right to reply. I will then put it. All those in favour, please say aye and raise your hands. Aye. 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 Against? Abstentions? Councillor Robson and Councillor Aubrey. Otherwise it is carried. Moving to the last agendaed part of this policy, issue 8, payment for being part of a resource consent hearings panel. Is somebody prepared to move either 8.1, which suggests that members of that panel are entitled to claim a time for being on that panel? 8.2 talks about there being no reference in it in the policy. I would suggest perhaps even there could be an 8.3 which explicitly rules it out. Is there anybody prepared to move something from the table?
Can I just get a question from
Yes.
Coral? I understood that, and I may have read it wrong, but I thought they were saying it had to be paid. Is that not correct?
I think Emma and Jeremy can answer that question.
The determination says is entitled to be paid a fee up to $100 per hour and up to $80 per hour.
Can I? Oh, yeah, just if we're considered to be working full-time and that comes in within a full-time job role, is that not covered within our salaries?
That's certainly a rhetorical question for members to consider. Yep, Councillor Baldock.
I'd comment that if you undergo the training and that's all taken care of, and then if we do decide to put elected members on any of the hearings panels, we never do it on consent panels, but if you are on hearings panels, you will do a lot more work than what is normally considered in a 40-hour thing, because there is not only sitting on the thing, which is part of it, the reading and the preparation for plan changes is quite enormous. So I'm not saying one way or the other, but it is a lot more work than what a normal councillor would be undertaking in a week.
Question, Councillor Clout.
Well, our practice so far has been that councillors are not on those city plan hearings.
So there's two aspects to that. One is that the city plan hearings have, certainly in the last 6 years, been conducted either just before or just after an election, and in which elected members have not had the opportunity to sit on those panels, and that's something which I think we must address in the future. Elected members must be on those hearing panels. Secondly, there have been no subsequent, in the last 6 years at least, no subsequent plan changes that required hearings for members to be on. We have just approved subsequent plan hearings, which have worked through the process. Yeah.
So that's correct, and there are some plan changes that are proposed to progress. The previous council, pre the election, approved the concept of a streamlined plan change approach, particularly in respect of residential intensification and the stormwater management plan changes. You haven't yet, or that council did not pass a resolution on who would be on that panel. That's a decision that will be made in the new year. So it's possible that the council would establish a panel, and in that panel there would be some elected members.
Councillor Hollis.
Just further to Councillor Baldock's statement, and Heidi Hughes as well. We all do get well paid, and our job is incredibly complex, and to suggest that specific parts of it are harder than other parts during the normal course of our business seems a bit interesting, to say the least. Unless being on a hearing occurs regularly after 5 o'clock or through a weekend, getting remunerated extra is, you're going to give up part of your week to be doing a hearing reading or things like that. But to suggest that it's significantly harder, I think isn't accurate.
A reminder, we're just in question mode at the moment, but that is certainly a good point of debate. Is somebody prepared to move something? What is it you've proposed to move, Councillor Clout?
I'll be moving your proposed 8.3, which was excluding the option of payment for resource consent and city plan change hearings.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Robson. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Clout?
So, yeah, as has already been mentioned, we are paid effectively for a full-time job. Councillor Hollis made a good point. Unless there was a lot of sort of outside normal hours of operation, then that might be something to look at. But generally, I don't believe those hearings are outside normal working hours. So, happy for that to be included just in our normal salaries.
Seconded, do you wish to speak now or reserve? Okay, any further speakers?
I'll have to speak to it. Of course, I'm an RMA commissioner and I may end up on one of those panels, though I think those who've recommended no payment are doing so from a lack of knowledge of what is involved. It is not about sitting on a hearing during the working hours of a day. It is the preparation for that hearing and there's a lot of work in it, and I hope we will get volunteers for the panels if there is no additional remuneration for it, because that's why they have set a limit to it. They do know more about it than what we do. And it probably pushes, if you're in the midst of something like the plan changes we're going to go, you're probably talking about a 60-hour week, not a 40-hour week, if you are going to do the functions that are required under that hearing. So.
Any additional speakers? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, to reduce my hours to 60 a week would be a blessing. I make the point quite clearly. We've already started to set a precedent here in an earlier council meeting where people claimed that the average councillor runs a full-time job, but additional roles have significant additional responsibilities. And we're starting to see this in a very transactional way. Those additional responsibilities require additional time, and therefore people must be rewarded for that time. I would observe that, having recently read the Morrison Lowe report, read it last night, I'm obviously exploring the issue of internal borrowing and whether it's acceptable behaviour, and having read the Office of the Auditor General's report at 2 o'clock this morning, that a councillor's job is as big as a councillor wants it to be, and that if you choose to take on additional responsibilities, they're not forced upon you, you will by definition be paying an opportunity cost. You will be giving up the time you could otherwise spend exploring other issues, and there's a lot of them. So the idea that we have this transactional approach that every formal additional appointment requires some sort of additional remuneration, I find actually abhorrent. So that's where I sit on it.
Any further speakers? Right of reply? No. I'm going to say Councillor Arbery.
I'll be voting in favour, mainly because I think we want people who are passionate about the issues being on those hearing panels and not treating it as a way to get extra income.
Any further speakers? Right or reply, Councillor Clout? No? Okay, I will put what has been termed as 8.3. All those in favour, please raise your hand high and say aye. Aye. All those against, please raise your hand and say no. No. That is Councillor Baldock has said no. Everybody else has said aye. That is carried. Are there any other proposed resolutions in terms of the elected members, let me get the policy wording right, the elected members' expenses and resources policy? Councillor Robson.
Yes, and this is slightly in the spirit of some elected members that aren't here any longer. This is in the spirit of haven't quite got the wording exactly right, possibly, but I would like to move that councillors, if provided with a parking space, pay for that parking space, i.e. that there be no free parking for councillors unless in fact they're playing Monopoly.
I'll second that.
Moved that if councillors are provided with a parking space that they they are required to pay. No, hang on. Yeah. Let's just take a couple of minutes and we'll get some appropriate wording. So we'll just adjourn for a couple of minutes. And if perhaps Councillor Robson and Councillor Hughes could come and speak with the committee secretary, we'll get some appropriate wording and then we will discuss that. We're adjourned for 2 or 3 minutes. Councillor Robson, Councillor Hughes and various unnamed other professionals have come up with some good use of the English language. Of course, colleagues will determine whether it's a good use of resources or not, or time. And the resolution proposed by Councillor Robson and seconded by Councillor Hughes reads as follows: that councillors are provided with an option of a dedicated parking space to be paid by the councillor personally at market rates. So I'll read it again. Councillors are provided with an option of a dedicated parking space, comma, to be paid by the councillor personally at market rates. And so that does not include the mayor. That's the word councillor in there. Okay, so that has been moved, that has been seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Robson?
I mean, I think it goes with the principle of encouraging modal shift. It's also something that I've been sort of working on for a number of years now, but I believe there's been a shift in the balance on council. I believe it's appropriate to explore this topic again. I've always felt it somewhat hypocritical for council to have policies of modal shift, advocating public transport, and yet take in effect in Kingsview parking to the value of $2,400 that the average ratepayer, say paying 20% tax, would effectively have to give up $3,000 worth of income, gross income, to get. I think it's a substantive bonus for being a councillor. I don't think it's justified, and there are a number of councillors I know who didn't take advantage of that opportunity previously, who used public transport or other means, micro-mobility, etc. And I think we should, you know, sort of live by our own copapa. We shouldn't be hypocritical here. So, and again, given the significant increase in income that even us returning councillors have had, it's not an imposition. Last triennium I was on something like 83,000 as a chair. I'm now on something like 96,000. I'm not uncomfortable with making that sacrifice.
Seconder, do you wish to speak?
Thank you. One of the biggest challenges we're all facing in our future here in Tauranga is transport. We're trying to do a modal shift, and one of the biggest things I heard on the election trail was we can't get parking in the city, and our city is coming to a standstill now. Our councillors have been given 11 parks which are sitting 24/7 ready for them at their disposal for free on our city. There's probably not many other people in our city that have that have that availability, especially if we're trying to show what we're trying to do. So I've chosen to give up my car park already, and when I rang to say that I'd like to do that, they said, oh, thank you, because now we'll be able to give the guest car park back to the guests, because we didn't actually have enough car parks for everybody. So if we are, I mean, I obviously believe, somebody just said to me, oh, but I don't know if I'd be able to get into town without my car. I don't know if I'd be able to do that. I said, well, that's the problem that everyone else in the city is currently facing. And unless we can face up to exactly what the problem is for everybody else in the city by owning it ourselves, we can have the choice whether we pay for a park or we can join the rest of the city with the problem, and then we'll be much more ready to come up with solutions as a council. Thanks.
Other speakers, Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I'll speak against the motion and vote against it. I think Councillor Hughes used the right words. It's a matter of choice. And where choices are made, people can be congratulated for that choice. But we don't all have the same choices. If I take a bus, and I tried to do it the other day because I didn't want to park up at 3rd Ave, and if I take a bus from my place, I have to go around and down Fraser Street and then around, probably change at the hospital, and then I end up around Cook Street, and you know, it does not work. Having pay for your park doesn't change its availability, does it? If we really want to make those parks available, there is an app that's been sponsored by businesses in town where people with leased parks can put them up there when they're not using them. But Councillor Robson introduced himself to one of our new senior leadership team as a millionaire and a philanthropist. You know, if he has the choice to pay for his, he may do so. But I believe that we need parks available at all times of the day, all times of the week and so on, as we do our jobs. And here we're not, I will be in here pretty much 8 till 5 most days as Deputy Mayor. But, you know, as a councillor or as a chair of a committee, you're in here for different meetings at different times. It's stupid for us to be running around trying to find car parks. It's a very small matter, and I believe we are splitting hairs over this. And everyone around this table have different means of income, different levels of support. Nobody knows all the costs that we bear individually, no matter what our salaries may say in a newspaper. We may be doing other things by choice. So I think it's rather crazy.
Other speakers to the proposed course of action? Councillor Granger.
Yeah, before I do want to ask a question. So I presume that we're talking not only the councillors but the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor as well, is that correct?
The wording is only councillors, which does include the Deputy Mayor.
And not the Mayor, okay. Just one point I want to make. I think this is a ridiculous decision, and I'll tell you why. Simply this. We're serving the people, we're serving the public, and they want us to do the best job possible. Now, if I got to come into the council and search for a possible park, if I don't agree to the terms, and when Joe Bloggs rings me up and says, Bill, I want to meet you at the council at 10 o'clock, well, sorry, the bus doesn't leave till this, let's make it 12, 12:30. It's just getting to the stage, I'm sorry, you guys, but it's just getting to the stage where I draw the line and I think we're just going a little over the top. It's been suggested many, many years ago. And it got to the stage as absolutely not. Just remember what you are here for, and it's for the community. And I'm there to serve them the best I can. And I'm not going to be mucking around, jumping on buses, jumping on cycles to try and do something for them. I want to be there as best that I can straight away and do the best work that I can. And just don't forget, you guys, crikey, we're talking about, you know, yes, we should give this away, give that away. We don't get much in the way of perks, full stop. Absolutely full stop. My job is when I'm out there, absolutely when I walk around the city, when I go into supermarkets and that. People, Bill, while I've got you, let's grab you. Not many people think of that, the amount of times I go to the Citizens Club for a quiet beer, tapped on the shoulder, whilst you're here, Bill, let's talk about council work. So you just think about the things that you do. People don't realise. And you're talking about now just to go to that extreme. I'm sorry, John, but I think we are just going a little over the top. Thank you.
Other speakers to the motion? Councillor Clout.
Yeah, I don't have any specific facts about this, so I might be a bit wrong here, but I don't believe it's unusual for councillors all around, New Zealand to have offered a car park in the course of their duties. I'm not aware of any other councils that charge their councillors to park, but as I say, I don't have the facts on that. But I'd be surprised if there was many who were doing that. To me, it's a nice little bit of virtue signalling, but I don't buy into it.
Mayor Powell.
I appreciate that I'm not directly involved in this and the circumstances of the discussion, but I just think it's incredibly inefficient to Councillor Granger's point, to not be able to come and go freely and to have to hunt for cars. And I think efficiency is something that we should be addressing more than any one thing in our abilities to perform our duties as councillors. And I appreciate that some may not be here all day, but you may still be working from home or whatever that is. But I totally agree with Councillor Granger that to be able to come and go and to be able to support meetings as and when is required is very important. I have empathy for what Councillor Hughes is saying, and of course we are working towards that, but we are some way away from it, in my view, at this stage.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I'll be voting in support. I don't need a car park. I tend to bike most places or catch the bus when I don't bike. So if this motion doesn't pass, then I'll do the same thing as Heidi's done.
Speaking to it myself, I do find the arguments of Councillor Robson and Hughes incredibly compelling. There is we, or perhaps I should say I, do a lot of preaching in terms of from the council chamber, and Councillor Robson and Hughes's proposal certainly would encourage people to practice what they preach. And so I do have a great deal of sympathy for it. That being said, I think it would be more appropriate if this matter, and it's not excluding the fact that this council can make a determination on the matter now, but I think it would be more appropriate if the matter was determined by a council prior to an election, so that people are aware of what the program is going forward at the time that they stand for election, and then they can make decisions accordingly. That being said, there was a determination in terms of remuneration last week or the week before, which members may not have been aware of when they chose to stand for election. That being said, the requirement for the remuneration pool to be fully exercised by the remuneration authority is a matter of public record. I would congratulate and extol the virtues of members who are choosing to save ratepayers' money in this regard, and also those that are choosing to lead by example in terms of their own personal transport choices. I would not seek to penalise others in other circumstances, though. Therefore, I will be voting against this motion. Any other speakers? No? Right of reply, Councillor Robson.
Yes. I'm struggling with this extolling the virtues and then choosing the path of the sinner. It's struggling to understand how that fits with any sort of consistent kaupapa. Look, it's pretty simple, really. We do all make choices, and this has the efficiency argument is a nonsense. The motion explicitly says that people will be provided with a car park. Explicitly says that. There's no efficiency issue here. There's merely, and I use that word in inverted commas, the issue of hypocrisy and equity and consistency with expressed kaupapa and policy. And it flies in the face. If you need the car park, it will be provided for you. The only thing that changes is that you pay for that privilege like most people do. And when I take that coffee in Robert Harris and I'm confronted with the, do you work for council? Well, you can get a discount on that, which of course I pass to the woman standing in line because I don't need a discount on my coffee. I sort of reflect on the privilege and the reward we get here because we don't serve for money, and I reflect on what we're trying to achieve as a city and think that if I should choose to use my car, then I should carry the burden of using my car. And I would remind people that 10 times $2,400 is $24,000, and over the course of a triennium, that's $72,000, and that's significantly more than we chose to give Tiafina, I believe, when we set it up. These sums add up over time. They count. But more importantly than anything else is a principle here of doing what we say we're going to do and paying the price for our choices. It's the delinking of the costs of our choices from the price we pay that is the cause of so much angst and problems in the world. And if I circle back to the begging and rough sleeping bylaw, if we had a country where we were prepared, or the rich and the high income earners were prepared to pay the sort of taxes that they pay in those civilized northwestern European countries, we would have the funds to address those issues. These principles count. And if we can't do it at this level, I fear for our ability to do it at a bigger and more substantive level. I would urge the chair particularly, because I know he is a good man, to consider carefully where he sits on
Point
this.
of order, Councillor Granger.
Can we just get back to the direction without going, off in other quarters, which I think this is happening with Councillor Robson?
Councillor Robson is no doubt concluding his remarks now, and one would want to be aware of, indeed extolling the virtue of one member, that doesn't necessarily mean that other members are not of the same virtue. Councillor Robson.
I've concluded.
Okay, I will now put the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hands and say aye. That is Councillor Robson, Councillor Hughes and Councillor Aubrey. Those who are against, please raise your hands and say aye. There's Councillor Granger, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Clout, Councillor Hollis, Mayor Powell, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Salisbury and Councillor Morris. Any abstentions? No. I declare that carried.
Could I have a question to the Chief Executive, please? Lost.
Yes, I declare that lost. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Freudian. Right, Councillor Baldock.
I just wonder if the Chief Executive could estimate how much money we just wasted in that little debate.
No, I couldn't estimate.
If the Chief Executive sends me the bill, I'll pay it to a charity.
Right, okay, order. We need to move C in terms of the recommendations that have gone through, which is that we note that minor amendments to the mileage provisions and the elected members' expenses and resources policy are required to align with the LG members 2019-20 determination 2019. I'm wondering, Committee Secretary, whether we are able to display the result of the resolutions that we have passed today on the big screen. And I would also actually now just yield the floor to Mr. Bowes, because he has a comment on 8.3 as we passed it. Staff are not entirely 100% clear on whether we have passed something that is able to be achieved, but I'll hand it over to Mr. Bowes.
So we'll take the spirit of the meeting and the resolution as it came and see if we can work with it. Just reading through this, the hearings payment is an entitlement, and hearings are defined in the determination. The question to somebody smarter than me will be, can we fiddle with that determination by taking some sorts of hearings out and leaving other ones in? And I don't know the answer, but when we bring this policy back, we'll just expand on that for you and either say, we've done exactly what you asked us to do because it's okay, or we haven't been able to do that because it's not okay. And then we'll have that conversation. The second part then is about that next stage. Ordinarily, we would bring this back to the next policy committee meeting. The next arranged one will be in February. The question then is, do you want to expedite the creation of this new policy and bring it directly back to, say, Council on the 17th of December rather than wait till February? If we wait till February, we can still backdate the operation stuff. It just makes it a bit easier for the operational people if you...
Members, I would like some guidance, please. Councillor Baldock.
Move just leaving it until the appropriate time in February. There's no great urgency for it, I don't think.
Great urgency. I would concur with that view. We need to move C, members. Councillor Baldock, you've indicated you wish to move C, seconded by Councillor Clout. Is there any discussion? No. I will put that. I'll put C. All those in favour, please say aye. Against and carried. And that on the screen behind us, notwithstanding the highlighted points, that is what we have moved today as we've gone through that methodically. We now, members, need to move to the exclusion of the public, but before we do that, I'll ask if there are any late items. There are no late items. Can I please have a mover and seconder that we move into the exclusion of the public for receiving a couple of matters. One, some advice on the rough sleeping and begging, provisions of street use and public places bylaw. Another is just the appointment process for trustees of Tourism Bay of Plenty. We need to hold that in discussion out of courtesy to our colleagues at the Western Bay of Plenty District Council. Of a mover, that be held in confidential, moved by Councillor Baldock, seconded by Councillor Clout. Any discussion? No. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against and carried. We are now in confidential, and we'll just